Hello everyone, and welcome back to Haunted Bedtime. I know many of you tune in to these stories to help you drift off to sleep. So before you settle in, I'd love for each of you to leave a comment sharing where in the world you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to give a like and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. I grew up in rural Oklahoma, on a spread of about 80 acres that has belonged to my mother's side of the family for generations. If you drove out from the nearest town, you would leave the blacktop after 8 or 9 miles, cross a single-lane bridge over a muddy creek, follow a gravel road that rattled the frame of any pickup built after the 1990s, and finally reach our front gate. A sagging metal tube gate secured with a length of logging chain and an old combination lock. The first time visitors made the trip, they always complained how their phone lost signal halfway, how dust rolled in through cracked windows, how the cows roamed so close to the ditch they thought a longhorn might step onto the hood. To anyone who had lived in our county more than 2 seasons, though, the drive felt normal. The land was dry most of the year, flattened by wind and dotted with blackjack oaks and patches of waist-high bluestem. My family carved out a living running cattle, raising a few hogs, baling hay, and fixing whatever broke with fence wire, vice grips, and hope. Because the property sat so far from town, we all learned early to make our own entertainment. When I was small, my cousins and I played hide and seek around the combine shed, rode bicycles down the long dirt track to the old barn, and hunted bullfrogs in the pond with cane poles fashioned from switchgrass. On stormy nights, we gathered on Grandma's wide front porch, listening to bobwhite quail call before the rain pushed them deeper into brush, and telling each other the same handful of ghost stories our uncles had told us. Most of those stories were little more than local lore: lights seen drifting above the creek, a jaybird that cursed like a railroad worker, the silhouette of a headless horseman glimpsed once by a cousin's neighbor's friend. We repeated them because they made us squeal, then laugh, then chase each other down the hall pretending to be the bogeyman. Everybody knew the scariest thing we were likely to meet in the real world was a skunk under the porch or a neighbor's bull that had pushed through a sagging fence. Still, strange events happened often enough that nobody in the family scoffed when someone claimed something weird had occurred. Sometimes the cattle would bawl all night for no reason. Other times the farm dogs would whimper and crawl under the propane tank, tails tucked, though no coyote howl carried on the wind. My grandmother kept a little notebook by the pantry door where she jotted dates of odd happenings. Nights the yard security light flicked off and on without wind. Mornings when fresh footprints appeared in the soft earth around the pump house, though none of us had passed there. Grandma never described the footprints in detail, and I never thought to ask. To me, they were simply another mystery of the countryside, like why owls screech louder in January, or how mud daubers always found their way into the mailbox. Most of those puzzles slipped to the back of my mind, overshadowed by ordinary chores and childhood mischief, until one night when I was maybe 9 or 10 years old, or possibly younger, the exact year blurs, when something stepped out of the ordinary and folded itself into my memory so deeply I can recall every smell, every crack in the porch boards, every cold shiver across my neck. It happened on a weekend like dozens before it. My parents had driven into town for what they said was business. I suspected it was an anniversary supper, so I spent the night at Grandma's ranch house. She always let me drink coffee milk before bed, half a mug of hot milk with a splash of decaf, and watch whatever evening movie glowed on the single TV channel she could tune in using the old rooftop antenna. When the credits rolled, she spread a quilt on the couch for me, because I said the living room hiss of the propane space heater helped me fall asleep faster than the silence of the spare bedroom. Grandma retired early as usual. I remember the kitchen clock chimed midnight, while a rerun of Bonanza muttered on low volume. I must have drifted off with the glow of the TV splashing pale blue across the walls. The next thing I knew, my eyes snapped open in darkness. The screen had gone blank, the heater's thermostat had clicked off, and the house lay still. I had that empty bladder ache no kid can ignore. Grandma's bathroom sat only 3 steps from the couch, just past the door frame. A straight shot once my toes found the worn patch in the linoleum. Yet the instant I stood, a pull tugged me toward the front door on the opposite end of the room. Not curiosity exactly, not a half-dreaming daze, but a need so insistent it was like hearing my name called in a whisper only I could detect. The doorknob glimmered faintly where moonlight leaked around the curtains. I turned the bolt with barely a click, eased the hinge so it would not creak, and slipped onto the porch. October wind greeted me, cool and damp with dew. Most years by mid-month we could smell the first hint of wood smoke drifting from neighbors' chimneys, but that night the air carried no scent. No cricket rasped, no distant cow lowed. No cicada hummed from the pecan limbs overhanging the driveway. Only soft breath of breeze stroked the porch rails. Such silence sometimes settled before big thunderstorms, as if every creature sensed electric tension and waited for the sky to split. But when I glanced upward, I saw a scattering of stars and a slim moon bright enough to outline the tool shed 40 yards away. No weather threatened. I padded to the porch edge and relieved myself off the boards as farm kids often do. The yard lamp at the barn corner, which usually glowed pale sodium yellow, was dark. The one atop the chicken coop also black. Odd, but power blinked off occasionally, and the main breaker could trip if wind rattled the line. I listened, expecting a generator hum from the neighbor's place south of us, but heard nothing. The hush unnerved me. Instinct tells a farm kid silence means watchfulness. Maybe a bobcat prowling the hen house, maybe a stray dog menacing calves, maybe an unfamiliar pickup idling without lights on the far lane. I scanned left toward the garage. Grandma called it a garage, though it was really a metal-roofed workshop where my grandfather once rebuilt tractor carburetors. Thunderstorms had flaked its green paint. Bramble climbed the western wall. Dented drums of diesel sat by the roll-up door. That night, the moon painted the building dim silver, and there, near the corner where a heap of scrap lumber gathered, stood a shape. At first, I thought it was a fence post someone had propped upright. Tall, narrow, featureless, drenched in shadow. Then 2 points of faint light, eyes, or something like eyes, reflected pale starlight. The shape was not wearing clothes. It looked more like the silhouette of a person cut from the blackest cloth imaginable. It possessed shoulders, arms, torso, yet no detail of nose or mouth, no hair, no folds of fabric, no glimmer of buttons. It was simply a human outline filled in with darkness. If you have ever stared at the Bic Lighter logo, the white imprint of a head and body, imagine that shape, but drawn in negative space so pure that even the faint glow of the moon seemed unable to touch its surface. My first flare of fear was tempered by a strange calm. Something about the figure's posture suggested it was as startled as I. Its eyes did not flash menace. They widened slowly, more like a deer caught in a flashlight beam than a prowler sizing up a yard. I should have turned, run inside, latched the door, shaken my grandmother awake. Instead, I felt pulled forward, curiosity overriding caution, as if an unseen voice whispered everything would be okay, that all I needed to do was step closer to understand. I crossed the patch of bare dirt between porch and driveway, shoes forgotten, nightshirt fluttering against my legs. Each time I moved, the figure's eyes widened a fraction more, yet the rest of its body held absolute still. No shuffle backward, no defensive brace, no tilt of head. 10 feet away, then 8, then 5. I could see nothing but pure absence of color, as though a hole had opened in the fabric of night and took the shape of a man. My fingers, chilled by the October air, lifted as though to poke that darkness. A child's instinct, perhaps. You prod the unknown to test if it is real. Just before contact, the figure exploded into motion. So sudden, the corner of my vision blurred. One long stride, and it leapt over me. I felt a rush of displaced air, heard no footfall, only the soft clatter of gravel disturbed. By the time I pivoted to track it, the figure had raced halfway across the yard. It reached the barbed wire fence bounding our property and cleared the strand in a single bound, vaulting with feet tucked high like a track star's hurdle technique. The top wire hit my sternum when I stood beside it years later. For this shape to clear it at speed would demand a leap of nearly chest height on a 6-foot-plus adult. I had never seen anything human or animal move so fast. The figure continued across the neighbor's pasture and vanished into a line of blackjack oaks in less time than it took me to exhale. Only when it disappeared did I notice the smell. A whiff carried on the same breeze that bent frosted grass. Imagine stale sweat left on clothes in a sealed hamper for weeks, mixed with the sweet rot of an opossum carcass from under the shed, and the peppery musk of dogs that sleep in their own urine. I gagged, stumbled backward, nearly slipped on the slick porch step. The odor faded quickly as wind shifted, but its memory clung in my nose until sunrise. Somehow I regained enough sense to stumble inside, latch the deadbolt, and crawl under the quilt on the couch. I lay awake until dawn poured pale orange across the curtains, waiting for the yard lamps to flicker back to life, listening for chickens to rustle in the coop. When Grandma padded out of her bedroom, setting her house shoes quietly so as not to wake me, I pretended sleep. I told myself the episode had been a dream, or at worst a prank by an older cousin wearing dark coveralls. The thought half convinced me until I stepped outside after breakfast and found my footprints clear in the dew leading to the fence, where nothing else disturbed the grass on either side. I kept that night mostly to myself. At school, kids would have laughed. Even among my cousins, the story might have become just another ghost tale told at bonfires, cheapened with exaggerations. In private moments, I replayed the image, fixed partly on the figure's impossible speed, but more on the fixed stillness before the jump, on the deer caught in headlights wideness of the eyes. Whatever that thing was, it had seemed less evil than startled, as if my approach had broken some unwritten rule. Years slid by. I learned to drive tractors, to string fence, to load calves for market. I stayed many nights at Grandma's place with no weird visitors. The memory dulled into a private curiosity. Then, when I was around 11, my aunt and uncle moved a 30-foot camper trailer onto the property while they saved money to build a house on the South 40. The trailer sat maybe 40 yards from the garage, between the mulberry tree and the frost-bent swing set. They installed a propane bottle, ran a water line from the well house, and settled in. On warm evenings, I visited to borrow DVDs or eat supper from paper plates because the tiny sink was easier to clean. One night, Uncle Levi dragged a lawn chair outside to cool off after my little cousins fell asleep. He kept a battered Winchester 30-30 propped next to the camper door for dispatching coyotes that stalked the chicken coop. Around midnight, he heard metal clank. He swore it sounded exactly like the chain on the driveway gate striking the tubes, as if someone tried to climb the gate or drag it open without unlocking the padlock. Thinking a cow had pushed through, or perhaps a stray dog had slipped in, Uncle Levi grabbed his rifle, crept down the wooden steps, and peered toward the driveway. He spotted a shape, not a four-legged animal, but a tall, upright silhouette, scrambling over the gate. Startled, he raised the Winchester, cycled the lever once, and thumbed back the hammer. In the instant his thumb touched cold metal, the figure vanished. He would later insist it disappeared too fast to be human. The rifle still pointed at the gate. The chain still swung in the breeze. Uncle Levi stood frozen, ears straining for footsteps on gravel, but heard nothing. He stayed outside until dawn, pacing, imagining he might glimpse a shadow slip along the tree line. Nothing returned. Weeks later, Uncle Levi told me the story in a low voice after ending a phone call with the county sheriff about prowlers. I felt every hair on my arms lift. I had never shared my own encounter, yet his description echoed mine. A tall figure, blacker than its surroundings, moving with unnatural speed. When I asked about eyes, he hesitated, said maybe there was a glint, couldn't recall for sure because moonlight had been thin. He laughed off the event by promising to install motion lights facing the lane. He never admitted fear, but he kept that lever gun on a wall hook inside the door from then on instead of outside. Over the next few years, Grandma's notebook added fresh entries. Chickens panicked one night for no reason, eggs smashed inside the nesting boxes, goats found huddled at daylight against the barn wall, not venturing to pasture until mid-morning, the yard dogs growling at empty air, then tucking tails and refusing to leave the porch. She jotted dates, times, weather conditions. When I asked what she planned to do with the notes, she shrugged and said maybe one day she would spot a pattern. Life rolled forward. I finished high school, turned 18, and began to see weekends on the farm as a chance to earn gas money by helping bale hay rather than a place for sleepovers at Grandma's. Still, when cousins gathered for birthdays or bonfires, we shared hushed rumors of a shadow man, visible sometimes near the fence row. Someone would claim they saw eyes in the tree line. Another would counter that he probably saw raccoons. Stories rarely grew past a whisper because the adults discouraged frightening the younger kids. But every farm kid I knew avoided wandering between the garage and the gate after full dark. During my last year of high school, a senior research project required interviewing older relatives about family history. One Saturday afternoon, I sat at Grandma's kitchen table and flipped through her photo albums. She paused on a black and white snapshot of the original farmhouse, long torn down, pointing at a smudge near the edge. She said folks back then had complained of a dark walker crossing the pasture some nights. The smudge could have been damage on the film, but it looked oddly like a tall figure striding along the fence. Grandma smiled thinly, as if embarrassed to mention old superstitions, and turned the page. I never forgot the image. These days I am 18, taller than my father, stronger than the barbed wire braces that hold the south gate upright. But I feel a chill each time I recall the silent night I met that shadow at age 9, and the echo of my uncle's hurried story 9 years later. If friends press me for campfire tales, I will mention something weird seen once on the farm, but I clip the details short, afraid full truth will sound like fiction, or worse, might summon attention from whatever watches the fence line. I cannot prove the figure exists. I cannot swear it travels property to property as other neighbors describe. I can only describe what I witnessed. A human-shaped absence of light, eyes that widened not with threat but with recognition, an impossible leap over wire, and speed greater than any sprinting animal I have seen before or since. I do not know whether it was ghost, spirit, cryptid, or something beyond categories. I know only that curiosity guided me close, that instinct pulled my hand forward, and that some last-second alarm kept me from touching a darkness that might have swallowed me whole. When autumn nights deepen, wind rattles the sheet metal roof of the garage, and the cows bawl restlessly in the lower pasture, I sometimes step onto Grandma's porch after supper, mug of coffee milk warming my palms. I lean against the rail and study the yard. The newer LED lamp above the barn glows brighter than the old sodium one, yet shadows still pool behind the cedar posts. 3 swing sets have rusted to half their former height. The cattle guard pings occasionally as steel shrinks in cold. Most evenings crickets trill steady, but every so often the night turns breathless, the frogs fall silent, and the hair on my neck prickles. In those hushed minutes I remember a black figure near the garage, eyes glittering like distant stars, and I retreat inside, latch the deadbolt, and scan the moonlit yard through the window until normal night noises return. The farm remains home, and I love it fiercely. The dust, the smell of new-mown hay, the taste of well water drawn cold in metal dippers, but a sliver of me now belongs to caution. I have never seen the stranger again in more than 7 years, and part of me hopes I never do. Yet I cannot help listening whenever silence falls too deep, wondering if somewhere past the woven wire fence, the shadow stands again, waiting, maybe surprised, maybe curious, maybe simply watching to see whether I will approach a second time and press my hand against the impossible darkness of its skin. The place where I spent my childhood is not quite a town, not even a village in the usual sense of the word. Folks around here simply call it the Holler. Imagine a narrow, deep valley surrounded on every side by long ridges and tree-covered peaks. A creek as cold and clear as glass splits the valley in two, and a single gravel road, full of potholes, bends, and blind rises, winds beside that creek from one end of the holler to the other. Only 25 or 30 people still live there year-round, and all of us could fit into one good-sized church if we ever tried to meet at the same time. The nearest true town, the first place where you can buy groceries in more than 2s and 3s, lies almost an hour away by car. If you break down on the way in or out, you wait for help or get walking boots on your feet, because there is no cell service and no quick rescue. To outsiders, our valley appears peaceful. Verdant in summer, glowing red and gold in autumn, and breathtakingly white after a heavy snow. But anyone who lives here longer than a single season learns the holler has its scars. Before my grandparents were born, the land belonged to a coal company. Back then, hundreds of miners dug coal from the mountainsides, and dozens of company shacks stood where only a handful of homes stand today. The bosses built a rail spur, a store that paid workers in scrip instead of real money, and an enormous square-bodied furnace made of brick, iron, and soot-black dreams. A heavy steel cable ran from that furnace up the hillside into the mine mouth, and the furnace's fire powered the winch that hauled loaded coal cars out into daylight. The furnace roared day and night. It did not care what it burned. Old-timers passed down stories that when a miner was crushed by falling rock or drowned in a cut full of black water, and when no wife, cousin, or preacher came forward to claim the body, the company foreman ordered the corpse thrown into that furnace. Back to coal, back to the mountain, they said. Then the bosses sent every living man back underground to dig more fuel for the same flame. Decades later, after the richest seams played out, the company pulled its last payroll truck out of the valley, leaving the furnace to rust in silence and the workers to scatter or starve. Later, a land agency bought up most of the abandoned acreage. My parents rented the parcel where the furnace still crouched beneath peppervine. They raised chickens in sight of its cracked chimney and stored hay in sheds built from the same bricks miners once stacked. I heard odd tales all my life. Relatives spoke of screams in the night carried down on wind from the furnace ruins. Some neighbors swore they saw shapes like shadows, too long, too wide, stepping between trees after midnight. My friends and I laughed them off. If I lay under our lone street lamp in July, listening to Whip Poor Will's quarrel somewhere on the ridge, the last thing that worried me was a ghost from a time before my father's father was born. The change that came the summer I turned 13 erased that confidence forever. My birthday falls in early August, the point of the year when humidity hangs so thick it feels like an extra jacket on your back. To celebrate turning 13, I begged my parents to let me host a sleepover. We invited every kid who lived between the creek's first bridge and the old coal tipple. 7 boys and 3 girls, ages 11 to 15. A crowd big enough to fill my mother's kitchen with laughter and fishtail tales. All day we splashed in the swimming hole, played hide and seek in the hayfield, and loitered beside the bait shop freezer, hoping someone's uncle would buy grape sodas. After dusk, my father dragged an extension cord from the house so he could shine a work light under the maple tree and pick watermelon without turning on porch bulbs that attracted June bugs. Each of us felt on top of the world, half child, half grown, allowed to stay up as late as we liked for once. The main feature of the night was my trampoline. My parents set it up the previous spring, a round, blue-skirted contraption 20 feet across, with a net that we had already managed to tear in 3 places. The spot where the trampoline stood was perfect for stargazing. From the center of the mat, you could look straight between the 2 pole lights, one mounted on a cedar post right at the corner of our clapboard house, the other fixed 60 paces farther across the yard, out into the ink-black sky where the Milky Way spilled like sugar. Each pole cast a cone of yellow light about 50 feet wide, but beyond that glow the yard dissolved into ordinary Appalachian night. Dark forms of trees, darker gaps of underbrush, and a sense of something vast pressing its cool breath on your neck. We tossed our sleeping bags across the trampoline, pounded the springs until they groaned, and told jokes we would have been embarrassed to repeat in front of parents. A chorus of frogs chimed from the creek. Crickets trilled under the laurel hedge. The world sounded alive in the usual ways. Shortly before midnight, we popped a second batch of popcorn on the porch and sprawled across the mat again. No one seemed ready for bed. Someone suggested counting shooting stars. Someone else bet they could jump from the edge of the porch roof, clear the safety net, and land without snapping an ankle. The night throbbed with freedom. Just after midnight, judging by the clock on my father's phone, which he waved through the back door telling us hush, we heard a rustling from the slope behind the chicken yard. Squirrels? Rabbits? Possibly deer, though deer rarely stepped that close to the house when 10 kids squealed over rock, paper, scissors. We ignored it. The rustling faded. Laughter returned. A quarter hour later, a wail shivered out of the woods. The sound was sharp, high, and mournful, like a woman dragged by her hair through thorns. It rose, caught in its own throat, then died on a note so low I felt it tremble inside my chest. All conversation died instantly. In the hush, I glanced at my closest friend, Gary, whose father hunted with dogs and taught him to identify animals by voice. Gary's face tightened. Without taking his eyes from the trees, he muttered, "Panther." Around here, every adult warns children about black panthers. Officials claim no breeding population exists in these mountains, yet claw marks appear on fence posts and calves disappear from time to time. Locals say the cats scream like humans in mortal danger. We believe them. When Gary spoke, all the threats I had dismissed as tall tales came crowding back. The group decided, by unspoken agreement, that we had enjoyed enough fresh air. In a scramble, we crawled toward the trampoline's edge. That is when a shape stepped into the light of the far pole. At first I thought it was a bear on hind legs, or maybe a neighbor wearing some joke costume. It towered well over 6 feet. Thick limbs hung at its sides, ending in hands or paws tipped with claws as long as flashlight barrels. The body was covered in black, so deep it absorbed the yellow glow instead of reflecting it. My vision caught no zipper line, no flapping cloth, no hint of fur shining. The worst part was its face, or what should have been a face. Where you expect cheekbones, brow, chin, there was only a warped mask of flesh. Picture candle wax melted, then splashed across a skull and left to harden unevenly. Where teeth should hide behind lips, I saw fangs longer than my fingers protruding beyond what passed for its mouth. Eyes glowed from deep sockets, yellow, bright, like embers when you poke a fire and hidden coals flare. I could not move. None of us did. The air around me seemed to thicken, holding every limb in place. The creature lifted its head, and in that moment, I knew with primal certainty it saw us, heard the blood thumping in our ears, and felt our fear. It opened its mouth, if the tearing of flesh that took place can be called opening, and screamed. Not the panther scream we had heard earlier, but a deeper, raw sound that carried hate. Shock broke our paralysis. 10 children leaped off the trampoline at once, everyone trying to squeeze through the narrow opening in the loose netting. We became elbows and knees, wrestling to reach the porch. Someone knocked over a folding chair. Another pitched forward onto gravel, skinning palms, yet was up again before dust settled. My back felt exposed, as though claws might rip flesh any second. When we burst through the kitchen door, my mother, startled from bed by the racket, turned to see absolute terror on every face. My father stormed from his bedroom wearing boots and boxer shorts, shotgun clenched in both fists. We babbled. Black monster, huge claws, eyes like fire. Dad flicked on the yard lights, bright halogens that covered half the field, and charged outside. We huddled around Mom's waist. Seconds crawled. Finally, Dad stepped back into the doorway, chest rising, shotgun muzzle trembling slightly. He said nothing prowled the beams. No tracks, no noise now except frogs restarting their music. He searched the porch, the garden path, the base of each pole. Nothing. Mom turned stern. She guessed we had spooked at a stump or shadow. While she scolded, my father and I traded a glance. His eyes asked a question he would not voice in front of younger kids. "Are you sure?" My shaking hands answered. He set the shotgun beside the refrigerator and kept it there until dawn. We slept scattered across the living room floor, though none of us truly slept. Around 3 a.m., the frogs fell silent again. I buried my head under a pillow and prayed dawn would hurry. When finally sun filtered through threadbare curtains, the normal world looked unchanged. Dew glistened on grass, chickens pecked at insects, and the trampoline stood empty but intact. My courage, thin and fragile, returned enough to follow Dad outside. I expected to see no evidence at all and wondered if I would forever doubt my memory. Dad walked straight to the far pole light, the one nearer the ruins of the old furnace. There on the phone pole timber, 7 feet above ground, 3 gouges raked diagonally across the wood. The cuts were thick at the top, narrowing as they trailed lower, each groove deep enough for a thumb to fit. No bear around here stands tall enough on hind legs to carve such a mark at 7 feet. Even my father, a full 6'2", had to tiptoe to lay his palm flat beneath the topmost gash. Both of us stared until Mom called us for breakfast. Dad pried a splinter loose and slid it into a matchbox. He told me later the inner wood smelled of smoke, though the pole had never burned. My friends left one by one, each taking new nightmares. Weeks went by. School began. Homework claimed our evenings, and basketball practice claimed our weekends. Yet the night visit changed me. After sunset, I refused to cross the yard alone. I dragged the family dog inside and begged her to sleep beside my bed. I jumped whenever the house frame popped or the wind rattled siding. Small cruelties from classmates, mocking my stutter, hiding my lunch, no longer stung. A single truth burned brighter. Real monsters exist, and they walk hollers like mine, while the world pretends darkness is only absence of light. 5 years later, my Aunt Haley and Uncle Robert parked a small travel trailer in Grandma's side yard. They planned to build a simple 2-bedroom cabin on the ridge, but needed a cheap place to live meantime. The valley welcomed them with its usual quiet. 2 months in, Uncle Robert woke at midnight to the rattle of iron chains striking metal tube. He thought a stray cow tried to push through the driveway gate. Shotgun ready, he stepped onto the camper's fold-out stoop and aimed toward the clank. He caught a glimpse, just one heartbeat, of a tall, dark form climbing the gate. Before he could thumb the safety off, the figure dropped to the far side and was gone. He swore the distance between seeing and losing sight was too small for a human to sprint. He told me later it was like watching a shadow jump into itself. When I heard the story, every muscle remembered the night of my 13th birthday. I asked about the face. Uncle Robert admitted he could not see detail. The floodlight behind him threw glare across rain-slick ground. But he said 2 faint yellow spots hung where eyes should be, and they gleamed when the thing turned. He never saw teeth, but he heard a growl like the engine of a backhoe idling low. He strung extra barbed wire above the gate next day and set motion cameras facing the lane. Nothing unusual showed on the footage, at least nothing Uncle Robert cared to mention. But every 2 or 3 weeks, he found a camera tilted or the battery pack yanked loose. Neighbors, too, started sharing tales. A milk goat shredded behind a locked pen. A row of garden stakes pulled from the soil and snapped mid-shaft. A hiker on the old logging trail who heard a panther scream, then found clawed tracks as broad as dinner plates in soft mud. All of it could be blamed on common predators if one wanted simple answers. I no longer wanted simple answers. I moved away for college at 18, but holidays always draw me back to the holler. Each time I return, the furnace ruins stand exactly where they have for a century, black archway part hidden by ivy. On moonlit nights, high school kids dare each other to crawl inside and shine a flashlight against soot-glazed bricks. I never accepted that dare. The stories say the furnace ate the nameless dead. Some of us believe the fire forged something else inside its belly, something half-animal, half-damned soul that still prowls mountains seeking heat. People outside these ridges claim demons crouch only in scripture or folklore. They trust porch lights and strong locks to keep nightmares away. I know light reaches only as far as a single bulb's glow. Beyond that glow, the dark collects mysteries. On still nights, the valley can turn so silent you hear blood drum between your ears. And in that hush you may learn, as I did at 13, that a devil beast waits at the edge of sight, as real as barbed wire and old bricks, hungry for something more than stories. I tell myself danger has not touched me since. The fence has not again sprouted fresh claw marks. The furnace stands quiet, yet part of me remains that frightened boy on the trampoline, staring into eyes like living coals. Whenever crickets pause their song all at once or wind carries a distant panther-like wail across the timber, I slip inside, lock doors, and whisper a quick prayer. I know God is real, for I begged his name that night, and I believe the devil keeps pace in these mountains, wearing a body shaped like nightmare. Black hide, deformed grin, yellow burning eyes, and claws that gouge heart pine as easily as soft clay. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I never imagined that an ordinary weekend camping trip could change the landscape of my memories so completely, but the events of last summer etched themselves deeper than any lesson I have learned in a classroom. My family had reserved 3 adjoining sites at Miquelon Lake, a provincial campground in central Alberta, in part because my parents love its patchwork of trembling aspen forest, and in part because they have known most of the staff since before my younger sister and I were born. The lake itself has shrunk over the last few decades, leaving behind broad, muddy flats and a band of cracked salt-white shoreline, but the surrounding woods retain a simple prairie beauty. They fill with songbirds in the morning, smell of wild sage after a rain, and glow with midsummer twilight that never quite yields to full night until well past 11. I was 15 then, tall for my age, restless as only a teenager who has not yet learned to appreciate quiet can be. My best friend Zach, who is the same age and who had convinced his parents to let him tag along for the weekend, was lanky, all elbows and self-conscious jokes about being the slow one when we played soccer on the school field. We had camped together before, usually with half a dozen other friends, but this time most of the old crowd had other obligations, family reunions, sports camps, part-time summer jobs, so it ended up just Zach and me sharing a tent at the edge of my family's cluster of sites. On the Saturday evening that matters, we finished a supper of charcoal burgers, rinsed our plates under an outdoor tap, and launched into the ritual debate over how to spend the last hour of light. My father suggested cards around the picnic table. My mother floated the idea of a campfire sing-along, but Zach and I had itchy feet. It was too perfect an evening to sit among adults talking about real estate or the price of gasoline. A breeze drifted off the dried lake bed, carrying a hint of dust and cool air, and somewhere near the registration office, an unseen musician plucked a guitar in slow, thoughtful chords. At last, my parents sighed, reminded us to stick to the marked trails, keep our phones charged, and be back before the park's quiet hours began at 11. With that blessing, Zach freed the flashlight he kept clipped to his belt loop. I tugged the sheath of my K-bar knife into better alignment on my belt, and we loped toward the trailhead behind the visitor center. The main loop is wide and well-traveled, a flat earth ribbon worn down by decades of boots and stroller wheels. Its edges are lined with short wooden posts bearing blue, reflective squares, so even first-time visitors can find their way back after dusk. We had walked that main loop so many times over the years that Zach joked he could navigate it with his eyes closed. It twists through stands of aspen, whose white trunks catch the setting sun in streaks of gold, then dives briefly into spruce, where light gathers in green dimness, and finally emerges onto a meadow of knee-high grasses waving under late summer starshine. I suppose those features give most families all the variety they want in a short evening stroll, but Zach and I yearned for something less sanitized, more like the landscape explorers wrote about before maps filled in the blank spaces. Not quite halfway around the main loop, a narrower path branched left, its sign tilted and half covered in lichen. We recognized it, but that branch ultimately bends back toward the campground parking lot and rarely offers anything more exciting than a glimpse of jackrabbits. What caught Zach's eye that evening was the faint outline of another trail just beyond the branch, one that did not appear on the map boards near the trailhead. Its entrance was half hidden under the drooping bough of a spruce, and the ground beyond looked uneven. More stray animal track than park walkway. We exchanged a conspiratorial glance. Here was our detour, the little taste of the unknown we had been craving. I ducked first, pushing aside a spray of needles that flicked resin scent under my nose, and Zach followed. Within 20 paces, the drone of distant conversation from other campers faded, replaced by the hush of leaves slipping against one another high overhead. We walked single file because ferns pressed in on both sides, brushing our calves like curious house cats. Early twilight pooled beneath every bush, but the canopy still held a wedge of rosy light strong enough to guide our steps, so we did not bother switching on the flashlights. 15 minutes along, the new path began to feel familiar. The understory thinned until only the occasional juniper stubbed up from spongy moss. Each breath smelled of damp bark and a hint of lakebed minerals carried in the breeze. I remember pushing a branch aside and noting how the sunset glow had drained to an even lavender across the treetops. The quiet should have calmed me, yet a subtle tension slid under my ribcage, the sense that our intrusion might stir something sleeping just beyond sight. When my boot knocked a pebble loose from the middle of the trail, the clack of stone on stone rang louder than seemed possible. Over my shoulder, Zach murmured that maybe we should turn back soon so my parents would not worry. I answered that we could walk 5 more minutes, just to see if the path opened on the lake from a new angle. He shrugged agreement. We had barely gone 30 paces when a rustle slithered through dense shrubs to our right. We paused. Rabbits shuttle through the weed mats near Miquelon by the hundreds. Usually their scuttling comes in brief bursts, a scurry then stillness. This rustle was steady, rhythmic, something heavier weaving methodically. Zach tilted the beam of his small flashlight toward the sound, but its narrow cone cut only a wobbly tunnel through the bracken. "Beaver," he whispered, voicing the assumption that large rodents forage boldly in twilight because few predators bother them. The instant he spoke, the noise stopped. For 2 heartbeats, nothing moved, and then I glimpsed an outline at shoulder height. Rounded ears, a broad muzzle, whiskers trembling, black against deeper black. The eyes flashed a dull yellow-green as the last ambient light caught their lenses. Recognition punched the breath from my lungs. A cougar crouched less than 10 meters away, half concealed behind a patch of red-stemmed dogwood. I hissed Zach's name, pointed. His flashlight drifted slightly, but the beam jolted when he, too, realized what stared back at us. Cougars live all across Alberta's wooded zones, though hardly anyone outside specialized wildlife surveys ever sees them. Most cats avoid human encounters, preferring deer or beaver to a fight with bipedal intruders. Even so, I remembered headlines from the previous winter. A jogger on the west side of Edmonton killed by a cougar that had been stalking dogs along a river path. A rancher south of Calgary fending off a cat that clamped onto a colt's neck in broad daylight. Unlikely did not equal impossible. Doing my best to keep my voice low and even, I reminded Zach that we needed to back away, never turning our backs, making ourselves look larger if the cat emerged. The rustling resumed, same rhythm, brush swaying in waves, yet the cougar's head remained perfectly still. My brain stitched possibilities. Perhaps Kit's moved behind her, and the mother cat was positioning herself as a barrier. That would explain why our measured retreat, rather than triggering a chase, seemed to satisfy it momentarily. She needed only to ensure we left her family alone. Keeping my tone flat, I told Zach the noise probably belonged to young ones, so backing out would keep everyone safe. Whether that was insight or wishful thinking, I cannot say. We raised our arms slightly, palms out, took slow synchronized steps backward. After we had retreated perhaps 10 meters and rounded a gentle bend, the undergrowth blocked our view of where the cougar crouched. I waited another few seconds, ears straining for pursuit, then nodded for Zach to turn and walk normally. My pulse thundered, but the forest behind us remained quiet. Around the next curve, the path straightened. On either side, tall poplars left only a narrow window of sky, now tinted cobalt. We had walked no more than 5 steps when a figure loomed in the center of the trail ahead. Even in low light, I recognized the distinct silhouette, long tail curling behind, weight balanced forward on powerful front shoulders. The cougar had somehow circled us, or else a second cat blocked our way. In later conversations with biologists, they said a fit cougar can sprint silently through dense brush, vault fallen trunks, and outpace a jogging human in seconds. In that moment, those facts crystallized in a single terrifying truth. The animal was no longer content to shepherd us out of her territory. She was toying with us, testing angle and distance before attack. My breath snapped in cold spurts through my nostrils. Fight, flight, freeze. The body chooses before thought finishes forming. I rested my palm on the hilt of the K-bar, a heavy 8-inch fixed blade my uncle had presented on my last birthday with instructions never to brandish it lightly. The cougar's shoulders twitched. Its tail curled tighter, tip flicking. Zach fidgeted, emitting a thin, keening sound. I warned him not to run, but the words scarcely left my mouth before he pivoted and sprinted back up the trail. The flashlight beam danced erratically, illuminating first tree trunks, then darkness, then nothing as he disappeared. My heart clenched. Not anger at his instinctive flight, just fear that abandoning the buddy system doomed us both. Predators lunge for motion. My sudden loneliness on that narrow forest strip struck like a blow. The cat shifted weight onto hindquarters, muscles bunched under tawny fur. I perceived movement in water droplet slowness, forelimbs launching, haunches driving forward, body stretching into a single line of purpose. My hand wrenched the knife free. The cat covered 5 meters so fast the scene blurred. I thrust the blade upward in a crude spear grip. Steel met rib in a low, wet thump. The impact jarred my wrist and I felt cartilage resist, then slide. The cat shrieked, a ragged snarl half swallowed by rage. For an instant, its forward motion staggered. Thick, copper-scented breath burst over my cheek as the animal twisted midair, front claws raking. Pain lanced through my right hand, nerves flaring like exposed wires. The knife fell. We crashed onto the packed dirt. My shoulder blade struck first. The cat's torso slammed down a heartbeat after, paws seeking purchase. Instinct bowed my head, and I jammed my left forearm up into the space where jaws gaped for my throat. Vice-like pressure clamped on that sacrificial limb. Teeth punctured, spreading agony along bone. A primal shriek, not the cougar's but mine, escaped between clenched teeth. Somewhere behind me, Zach's distant voice shot through trees. He was calling for help, or perhaps delivering apologies lost in adrenaline. Either way, I saw only the cat's pupils dilating, illuminated by twilight. Smell of damp earth, tang of blood, rasp of its breath. My free hand groped for anything. Rock, branch, the knife I had lost. Fingers latched into moss and loose soil. Advice from some survival show flashed. Cougar throats, like those of domestic cats, trigger gag reflexes when prey pushes deep. I fear I cannot verify the science, but desperation forced the experiment. Ignoring the scream of muscles, I drove my left arm deeper past the cat's tongue toward its gullet. Pain escalated until sight pinwheeled. The cat recoiled, gagging, hot saliva spilling across my skin. Claws disengaged from my shoulders. Those seconds brought nothing like safety but cracked the creature's rhythm. I rolled sideways, trying to tuck knees between us. The cat lunged again, half coughing, half growling. A reverberation thundered across the forest, 1-2, and the animal's weight collapsed sideways. The report of a shotgun arrived in my ears a fraction later than felt possible, as if sound traveled through syrup. The cougar thrashed once, hind legs carving furrows into peat, then fell still. Air flooded my lungs. Numbness overtook pain for a moment, giving way to a sob that sounded childish in my own ears. A khaki-clad ranger burst into view, pump-action shotgun still angled downrange. Bark chips spattered his trousers where buckshot had splintered a tree beyond the cougar. Zach appeared behind him, face ghost white, hands shaking even after he slapped them on his thighs to steady nerves. The ranger knelt to ensure the cat was dead, then spoke calm instructions, voice practiced for crisis, telling me to hold pressure on my arm, asking whether the cat's claws shredded arteries in my shoulder. Together, they eased me onto a folded emergency blanket and secured gauze pads from a kit strapped to the ranger's belt. Zach hovered an arm's length away, eyes flicking from my blood-slicked sleeve to the still form of the cougar and back again. I remember murmuring an apology to him, though for what I do not know. He answered, "I thought you were dead," a statement half confession, half bewildered gratitude. The ranger's name was Jonah. He explained between quick knots of medical tape that earlier hikers had reported a limping cougar near the lake overlook. Jonah had driven the utility quad along the service road, planning to haze the animal back into deeper bush. Instead, he heard Zach's screams. Jonah's truck waited at a maintenance gate a kilometer down the trail, so he radioed ahead to let Alberta Parks dispatch know he was evacuating an injured camper. Darkness had thickened by the time we stumped toward the truck, Zach on one side of me, Jonah on the other, shotgun still cradled in Jonah's elbow in case the unlikely happened and a second cat appeared. At camp, my parents abandoned pretense of calm. My father's shirt front mottled with blood from bearing armloads of towels. My mother's voice wavered between instructions and prayer. Jonah helped us load into our SUV so we could drive to the nearest hospital, an hour south. He promised to file the incident report and mark the trail closed. He also insisted the porcupine quills embedded deep in the cougar's palate, visible when he had inspected the body, almost certainly caused its aggression. With its throat punctured every time it swallowed, the animal's instincts skewed. Pain made it desperate, unpredictable, willing to challenge larger prey. The explanation felt logical, yet no science softened the shock of reliving each second of the attack. In emergency reception fluorescent light, a nurse cut away my shredded sleeve, revealing punctures that looked like bullet holes where canine teeth had sunk. They cleaned, disinfected, and stitched. They injected broad-spectrum antibiotics and a tetanus booster, plus a morphine drip that muffled edges of reality. 2 days later, the ranger visited the hospital with paperwork for parks insurance and with a sealed plastic bag holding the K-bar he had found beside the trail. He told me a wildlife biologist had confirmed the cougar's desperate condition. Quills in the tongue and soft palate, weight far below normal. Had we encountered a healthy cat, he said, odds were strong it would have melted back into the trees and never shown itself. He added that my quick thrust with the knife likely disoriented the cougar just long enough for Zach's cries to guide help to the scene. I tried to feel heroic, but mostly replayed how helpless those first seconds had felt when fur and claws crashed over me. The ranger said the park would erect warning signs about injured wildlife and might increase patrols on side trails. When I was discharged, my bandages ran from knuckles to elbow. Physical therapists warned I might never regain full strength in my left forearm because one tendon had been partially severed. Months of physiotherapy followed. Rubber band extensions, putty squeezes, weighted wrist curls with soda cans until scar tissue loosened. My shoulders healed with less complaint, though 3 thick pink stripes remained, reminders etched into flesh. Emotionally, the recovery stretched longer. For weeks, nightmares replayed the cat's second appearance on the trail, my body tensing in bed as if claws pinned me again. School resumed, classmates asked for the story, teachers stared at the bandages but rarely pressed beyond polite questions. Zach and I drifted awkward for a while. Fear had stamped his memory too, but with guilt overlaying gratitude. One autumn afternoon, he pedaled his bike to my house, parked stiff-legged on the driveway, and without preamble blurted an apology. He had run when I needed him. I assured him nature picks fight or flight for us, that if he had stayed, the result might have been 2 funerals instead of 1 hospital stay. We sat on the porch sharing a bag of pretzels, discussing whether next summer we would attempt a backpacking loop in Jasper, where cougar populations also lurk. The conversation felt like grit on fresh scabs, yet necessary. By winter examinations, I could snow shovel without stabbing pain. By spring, I managed light chin-ups, though wrists trembled after 3 reps. That May, our biology teacher arranged a field trip to Elk Island, another provincial park east of Edmonton. Students trekked along boardwalks where bison herds graze. Several classmates glanced at me when a junior-sized bull crossed the trail, probably wondering if I would tense or panic. I felt my pulse rise, but the distance from predator to prey seemed less dramatic with bison munching cattails, ignoring our existence. I told myself healing sometimes hides in ordinary days. I returned to Miquelon the following summer, not to camp, but to walk the main loop with my parents. Jonah met us near the visitor center, raised a hand in greeting, and asked if we wanted to see a memorial plaque they had installed halfway along the old side trail. It reminded hikers injured wildlife can be dangerous. I declined politely, and he understood, steering conversation toward bird sightings instead. When we reached the turnoff, I paused a moment. Someone had posted laminated cards explaining proper response to cougar encounters. Stay calm, maintain eye contact, pick up children, back away slowly, fight only if attacked. The text felt detached, almost clinical, compared with the visceral memory in my mind. Yet, I was glad it existed. Information can save the next pair of curious teens from stumbling unprepared into danger. That evening, seated at our familiar picnic table, I found myself studying twilight again. The same cool wind stirred dust from the lake bed, the same spruce tops rustled. Darkness still slipped across the clearing like wet ink. I traced scars on my forearm, maps of pain and survival entwined. My sister, younger by 3 years, asked if I would ever walk side trails again. I said yes, with caution, maybe with bear spray and a bigger flashlight. She said she wants to join, so long as I teach her knife safety first. I smiled. Life does not promise safe passage, only more steps if we keep walking. Years from now, tourists will still wander Miquelon's marked loops, some oblivious to the silent watchers that slip between trunks at dusk, others alert to each broken twig underfoot. My knife rests in a drawer, freshly sharpened, hilt stained by memories no steel wool can scrub. Sometimes before sleep, I feel ghost pressure of feline jaws clamping. Then my mind flicks to the crack of Jonah's shotgun, the gasp of air returning, Zach's shaky relief, my mother pressing towels to stop blood. Pain taught me something simple that night. Danger, luck, and human aid intertwine in the tightest knots. We cannot tug one strand free without unraveling the others. If you happen to walk that hidden trail beyond the official map, you might still see a faint depression where cougar paws skidded in dense moss. And if wind angles right, you might smell cedar sap bleeding from the tree that caught Jonah's stray buckshot. Nature records its stories less with ink than with scars in bark and folded earth. My body carries its addition, every healed claw print a line of text in a narrative no one volunteers to write. Yet I count myself fortunate. I have lived to retell it, bones intact, lessons carved deeper than fear. A reminder that the wild offers beauty and teeth in equal measure, and each step beyond the familiar is a contract signed in breath and heartbeat. My name is Lucas Morales. I turned 16 this past spring, and most of my life I have lived in a working-class suburb on the eastern edge of Pennsylvania's Appalachian Plateau. From my bedroom window, if the weather is clear, I can see a ragged blue line of peaks on the horizon beyond the shopping mall lights and water towers. Those hills haunted my childhood imagination long before I was old enough to hike them. They seemed to promise everything the suburbs did not: silence, mystery, a sense that something older than turnpike traffic still breathed under the pines. My father's side of the family has hunted those mountains for generations. He grew up kneeling on the shag carpet of his grandmother's living room, oiling an inherited Winchester under his uncle's supervision. He talks about whitetail season the way some dads talk about the World Series, a yearly ritual, equal parts contest and communion. For as long as I can remember, late November has meant one thing: the whole clan piling into pickup trucks and SUVs and climbing the switchbacks to my Uncle Rick's hunting cabin the weekend before opening day. Half the time I would rather have stayed home gaming with friends, but I never dared admit as much to Dad. Hunting is his church, the cabin is his sanctuary, and the first Monday after Thanksgiving is his high holy day. Rick's cabin sits on a sliver of private property surrounded by state game lands. A dirt lane about a quarter-mile long punches through mixed oak and hemlock stands before opening into a small gravel lot. Rick installed an industrial spotlight on a telephone pole years ago. It floods the lot with harsh white light, illuminating his battered F-150, the firewood triangle, and the mounted buckhead over the door. The beam dies sharply at timberline. Beyond that edge, winter darkness pools thick enough to feel on your skin. Last year, November arrived early, all sleet and steel skies by Veterans Day, then gave way to a string of mild days that fooled the wildlife into moving at odd hours. Dad said it was perfect hunting weather. We loaded the truck with groceries, sleeping bags, orange vests, and enough ammunition to equip a platoon. By late Saturday afternoon, we climbed the last ridge and swung into Rick's drive, tires spitting cinders. The main cabin door sagged inward, releasing a wall of noise. Hank Jr. on the radio, bottles clacking, Rick's booming laugh, the smell of venison chili and cheap light beer. My older cousins shouted greetings. Everyone wanted to shake hands or thump shoulders, especially now that I had passed 6 feet and grown broader than half the uncles. I like the people in my family well enough, but the partying part, the way alcohol loosens tongues and blurs boundaries, has never felt comfortable. I knew how these pre-hunt nights played out. The grown-ups drank until the propane lamps fuzzed in their vision, then repeated the same stories about opening day 1998, or that 12-point ghost buck nobody ever saw after muzzleloader season. One cousin would pass out in the recliner. Another would cough cig smoke into the rafters while bragging about big plans that never materialized. The kids were usually left to flip through hunting magazines or watch reruns on the small TV. I had brought a deck of cards, hoping to talk some of the younger cousins into spades or euchre, but they migrated toward the older crowd once the second round of beers cracked. By 7, the cabin rang with off-key singing and the clink of empties against the wood stove. Around 8:30, I slipped outside for a smoke. Yeah, I know, 16 and smoking is stupid. In my head, it is only an occasional habit. 1 or 2 cigarettes at gatherings like this, when nobody who matters is counting, but I have noticed how the habit creeps. That night, as soon as I stepped onto the porch, cold air slammed my sinuses. The spotlight hummed. Beyond its glare, the driveway faded into blurry outlines of branches, and those dissolved into ink. I cupped the lighter, struck flame, and inhaled. The first drag stunned my throat. I exhaled toward the floodlight, watching the smoke twist like ghost script. Then I heard it, a sound that did not belong to any familiarity, part animal distress, part wheezing laugh. Picture a fawn bleeding for its mother, then stretch the note until it cracks, add a breathy cackle at the tail end, and you have an approximation. It rose from somewhere behind the cabin, deeper in the trees, wobbled once, and died. Something primal in me recoiled. Without finishing my smoke, I flicked the butt into the dirt and retreated inside. For the next couple of hours, the party rolled on. Cards slapped, dice rattled, beer foamed. I tried texting friends, but reception up there fluctuates between 1 bar and none. The cabin ran out of cell range when clouds rolled overhead, which they did in thick, bruised waves. At 10:30, Uncle Rick killed the generator to conserve fuel. Everyone groaned, switched to lanterns, and poured one last round. As the men drifted toward bunks, couches, or sleeping bags on the floor, I claimed a corner mattress on the second-story loft and pulled my phone again. My brain never shuts down quickly. Insomnia wraps thoughts in loops. I scrolled old photos, counted deer kills from seasons past, contrasted them with the year's low harvest numbers reported online. Below me, snores rose like slow thunder. Somewhere near midnight, my eyes finally sagged. That is when the sound returned, fainter, but the same wounded animal meets evil clown mashup. I lay flat, every muscle tense, and listened. The cabin's log walls muffled direction, but my gut told me the caller hovered beyond the driveway again, perhaps pacing the tree line, howling questions only another of its kind might answer. I buried my head under my jacket and willed sleep. Eventually I drifted off. Sunday dawned slate gray. Frost rimed the truck mirrors. A quick breakfast of eggs and leftover chili lined our stomachs before the group scattered to hang tree stands or scout ridges. The forest looked ordinary, no claw marks, no blood, no horror. By afternoon, we sat shoulder to shoulder on a fallen log, watching sun slide between trunks. No bucks presented shots. Back at the cabin, Uncle Rick grilled burgers while my father cleaned rifles. The earlier fright felt distant. Burger grease and wood smoke erased the memory enough that when night fell again, I figured the weird noise was either a fox or a drunk across the valley imitating coyotes for laughs. Sunday's drinking session started earlier than Saturday's. For the first round, I lingered, half listening to a story about one uncle's service days at Fort Lewis. But when Rick cracked his 4th beer and my cousin Tyler mixed whiskey into Coke, conversation changed timbre. Louder, harsher, more likely to swing into politics or rehash grudges. I pocketed my phone and stepped onto the porch again. Cold bit harder than the night before. Stars shone clear between sliding clouds. I leaned against the rail, lit a cigarette, and stared at the black gape where driveway met woods. The next part happened fast and slow at once. A figure drifted through the outer edge of the spotlight, a silhouette about my father's height, maybe a bit taller, hat brim shadowing the face. He stood next to Dad's sedan, one hand on the roof. Tense muscles loosened. I thought, oh, that's just Gary from Dad's shop grabbing another pack of smokes. He leaned forward, rummaging inside the cracked window, probably searching for lighter fluid. I called out, "Hey, we were wondering where you went." A voice answered behind me. "Sorry, bud, I dropped my cards in the truck." The voice belonged unmistakably to Gary. My spine jolted. I spun. Gary stepped from the doorway, filtering smoke through his teeth. Bile flooded my throat. I whipped around again. No figure by the car. No footfalls, no jingle of keys, no sound of brush crackling. The driveway looked exactly as it always did. Gravel, tire ruts, spotlight bleaching color from the F-150. Only a half-smoked cigarette smoldered in the dirt where I had flicked it. I swallowed twice, tried to frame a question, failed. Gary raised an eyebrow, exhaled a stream that vanished in wind, and asked if I was okay. For once, honesty seemed unwise. I muttered something about needing sleep and ducked inside. Later that night, when the cabin quieted, I found Dad examining tomorrow's weather on an ancient radio. I described the apparition at the car and the earlier howl. Dad pinched the bridge of his nose, looked at the ceiling, and said tree shadows plus tired eyes equal tricks. He admitted screech owls and vixens can fool newcomers with noises that sound half human. "But I'm no newcomer," I whispered. He replied that a Christian should not invite superstition. That ended discussion. Monday morning, first official day of rifle season. Dawn soaked the sky purple. A single shot cracked from the ridge opposite our stands. Static on the two-way erupted into Rick's triumphant shout. "Down to six-pointer. Need help dragging." Everyone slogged up the slope, found Rick kneeling beside the buck. We admired the clean heart shot, the antler symmetry. Field dressing warmed chilled fingers. The headlamp on my beanie threw harsh white across steaming entrails. Rick rolled the viscera into a contractor bag. He likes to dump offal in what he calls the feeding trough, a sunken pit beyond the old shed, so coyotes stay busy and maybe leave gut piles away from trails. We hung the carcass from a rig at the cabin. Quartered meat, washed knives. Around 4 in the afternoon, Rick said he had seasoned a couple of backstrap steaks, planned to grill them with potatoes. He carried the foil packet toward the gas grill bolted to the porch rail, set it on the prep shelf, walked inside for more beer. 10 minutes later, he stepped out and froze. The foil lay on the boards, torn open, glistening empty. No tracks on the porch, no clatter, no barking dogs. He blamed coyotes, though I knew none could climb those slick rail posts. After full dark, the temperature flirted with freezing. One by one, lights dimmed as older relatives sought warmth under thick quilts. By 10 o'clock, I lay awake, phone brightness dimmed to preserve batteries, thumb flicking across game icons. Every creak of log or whistle of wind sharpened my senses. Noon's bravado drained. Shadows pooled at the loft ladder space. A minute hand ticked, then the sound came again. Unmistakable now that I heard it thrice. A keening that began low, climbed to false cheer, broke into choked laughter, and dropped off like something strangled for sport. It echoed from the general direction of the feeding trough. I considered waking my father. He had scolded me for imagination. If I dragged him from bed to hear only quiet, he might revoke my hunt privileges. Pride warred with fear. Fear won. I slipped on boots and jacket, crept downstairs, unlatched the door as silently as I could, and stepped into crisp air. The glow from the spotlight revealed nothing unusual. Fresh snowflakes drifting, dried weeds nodding. Beyond its circumference, the world was ink. I eased off the porch, followed the faint outline of tire ruts toward the trough. Every crunch of frost underfoot thudded inside my skull. Halfway across the lot, I considered turning back. That is when movement flickered at the pit's edge. At first, it looked like a man on all fours, shoulders heaving. As my eyes adjusted, I saw shaggy fur mottled gray and brown, too coarse for coyote, and longer limbs, almost ape-like. The creature's spine hunched disturbingly high as it rooted through the heap of organs. From this distance, I could smell copper and bile. My stomach threatened revolt. I thought of the cougars rangers mentioned during safety talks, but this shape was broader, more humanoid. Just as terror prepared to override shock, the creature's head snapped up. Blood-slick sinews caught light. Twin prongs, antlers, horns, something bony rose from the skull, though they did not match any buckrack I had seen. No flare of nostrils, no bright eye shine, just two pits, absorbing illumination like black holes. Fight, flee, freeze, I froze. My breath crystallized. The thing rose onto hind limbs with the agonizing grace of someone testing new joints. It stood taller than any man present at the cabin, maybe 7 feet. Thick forearms dangled past knees. For a moment it did nothing but stare. Then, without crouch or turn, it was gone. One frame of reality showed it present. The next frame held only swirling snow. No rustle, no crunch, no footfall. The shotgun clamped. I bolted for the porch, heart-battering ribs banged the door with my shoulder, waking half the sleepers. Words collided. Horns, laughing sound, missing steak, gone. Dad glared, rubbed stubble, insisted demonic talk only empowers darkness. Still he checked the locks. At dawn, nobody found tracks around the trough, only churned blood now stiff as rust. Rick sold the cabin the next year, citing property taxes and his aching knees. though Dad claims those excuses never bothered him before. I have not returned to those mountains. Even from my safe suburb, I avoid looking out windows after sunset because night glass reflects just enough interior light to hide shapes that might stare back. Skeptics offer labels: skinwalker, wendigo, trickster, made from trauma and folklore. None fit exactly. What I met was as real as butchered venison and as indifferent as winter wind. It needed no name to claim that hollow between trees, nor to claim a hollow in my dreams. I am not the kind of person who expects anything unusual to happen in my neighborhood. Our street is half a mile from the rural suburban line in central Pennsylvania, the place where modest ranch houses sit on an acre or two, and mulched gardens blend into young woods that have been creeping back for half a century. We have enough room for backyard fire pits, ATV trails, and a shallow creek that floods every spring, yet we are close enough to town for a decent cell phone signal and pizza delivery that stays warm all the way to the porch. My parents bought the property 10 years ago because Dad could store his bass boat beside the detached garage, Mom could plant blueberry bushes without a homeowners association nagging her, and the school district still ranked high enough that teachers knew students by first name. Nothing about the place feels haunted or cursed. No rundown barns, no graveyard at the end of a lane, no chain-link fences draped with no trespassing signs. If you had asked me 6 months ago what the worst evening on our block could involve, I would have said kids lighting firecrackers at midnight or someone's shepherd getting loose and chewing through trash bags. That assumption melted on a Friday in late July, 3 days after my parents left for a quick trip to Asheville, North Carolina, where my grandfather still gambles energy on woodworking even though his back aches. Mom loves visiting him. Dad claims the Smokies help him breathe deeper. I enjoyed going when I was younger because Granddad spoiled me with wood shavings shaped like dragons. But the last few years, that side of the family has felt uptight. My cousins brag about lacrosse camps, my aunt leans political at dinner, and there is a church schedule pinned to the refrigerator that dictates conversation. When Mom asked whether I wanted to join, I floated the idea of house-sitting, feeding the lab, and watering her blueberry rows. She and Dad exchanged the kind of look that weighs risk and trust, then agreed on the condition that I text every evening and keep the house cleaner than a locker room. My friend Jack and I planned to use those 4 days as a mini vacation. Both of us were 17, both tall from a year of weight training, and both convinced we were adults as long as no parent watched to shake a head. Jack's home life runs strict. His father times his video game usage. The invitation to crash in my basement, eat frozen pizza at dawn, and roam ATV trails without curfew sounded to him like release. The only responsibilities were feeding my dog, Sadie, a 4-year-old black Labrador who weighs nearly 90 pounds, and answering Mom's nightly "everything okay" texts with thumbs-up emojis. We used the time exactly as you might guess. Halo marathons on the living room screen, Mountain Dew tall boys sweating on coasters, tortilla chip dust ground into the couch. We tramped half a mile down to the creek, skimmed Bluetooth speakers across playlists, and ding-dong ditched 2 neighbors who think speed bumps exist for decoration. All of it seemed tame compared to movies where kids throw raging keggers and crash Dad's sports car. We were conscious that security camera doorbells captured every porch step nowadays. We just wanted enough mischief to laugh about when senior year started. Because we stayed up gaming, we slept late. On Sunday, the 3rd night alone, we woke around noon, polished off cereal straight from the box, spent the afternoon mud roostering along old logging paths, then ordered Chinese food 40 minutes before the restaurant closed. The only real plan for the evening was to keep the Xbox controllers warm until my parents rolled in around midnight, at which point we would slap the console off and pretend we had been sensible all weekend. By 10, the sun was gone entirely, leaving one of those dense, humid Pennsylvania nights when cicadas buzz like electric fences and fireflies float above the grass. The living room blinds were closed to cut TV glare, the ceiling fan whirred, and we sat cross-legged on beanbag chairs arguing over cooperative tactics. Sadie sprawled across my lap, her head heavy enough to deaden my thigh. She thumps her tail if anyone mentions peanut butter even in passing, but apart from that she lounges like a bear rug. Around 10:30, a sudden yelp cut through game audio, sharp, high-pitched, crackling with pain. Jack hit pause. I muted the TV. Sadie's ears flicked up, but she did not bark. The yelp came again, distant yet unmistakable. An animal in distress, like a dog slammed in a gate or a fawn bitten by coyotes. I snapped the wand on the blinds and peeked out. Porch lamps formed yellow pools on the deck, but left the yard in gloom. Leaves rustled in an ordinary night breeze. No hint of movement. I asked Jack if he could spot anything. He lifted a slat with one finger and squinted. The next whine dragged out longer, ending in a hiccuping note almost like laughter. Jack whispered that maybe a neighbor's dog got stuck on a chain. We waited, but silence knitted itself back together. I let the blind drop. We unpaused the game and dove back into firefights, though an uneasiness hung around my shoulders, the sense you get when headlights follow too close on a rural road. The whine returned at intervals, sometimes softer, sometimes chopping mid-note. Each time my pulse sped. Eventually, near midnight, the noise tapered off. I convinced myself the dog had hobbled free, or its owner had let it in. Sadie snored at my feet. Her calm reassured me enough to forget the outside world again. When the final boss of the campaign crumpled on screen, Jack cheered, tossed the controller aside, and proposed popcorn as celebration. I agreed, plus root beer. Moments later, kernels rattled in the microwave bowl. Butter melted in the saucepan, and the smell of salt spread through the kitchen. While the machine popped, I texted my girlfriend Alyssa, who lives 10 minutes away on the other side of the two-lane. The idea of sharing popcorn and a horror flick sounded better than scrolling menus alone. Dad likes Alyssa. He calls her the calm one because she balances my occasional impulsivity. He would not mind her visiting as long as we kept doors locked and lights off by 1. Alyssa answered with a gif of a rabbit dancing and said she would be over in 15. Jack stacked bowls, I queued up a streaming service, and Sadie wagged at the front door, expecting the new arrival to scratch her ears. No more whining from the yard, no rustle at the windows. The quiet prompted me to brag about my earlier heroism in not freaking out. Jack rolled his eyes. We argued friendly over who had carried more points in the game. Normal stuff. Alyssa rang at exactly 12:15 a.m. I pressed the garage remote so she could park inside out of the damp. 30 seconds passed, then my phone buzzed. Alyssa's name lit up with a call, not a text. When I answered, her voice came rushed, jittery. Lucas, something big and gray just ran from your backyard into the woods. I saw it under your floodlight. I'm in the car with the doors locked. Can you open the garage again? I don't want to step out. My bravado shrank. I hit the wall switch. The garage door whined upward. Stay put, drive straight in, I said. The headlights swept the place as her sedan rolled inside, and the door clattered shut. Through the mudroom she hurried, face pale under porch light. She described seeing a tall shape bolt across the motion sensor zone behind the house, one heartbeat after the sensor clicked on. Gray or maybe pale brown, hunched, not on all fours like a deer or coyote, but upright, dipping between shadows. It vanished at tree line. Jack paced. I attempted casual calm, even laughed that maybe it was the neighbor's Great Dane. Alyssa's expression scolded any joke. We triple-checked door locks, dished popcorn, and settled on the sectional with a thriller whose plot we would later fail to recall. Sadie curled on the rug. 20 minutes crawled, our shoulders loosened. The movie hit midpoint, building tension with violin screeches. Then the scream outside sliced through speakers, raw, a sound carrying more volume than before. Closer, as though lungs pushed right against the glass. Remote clattered from my hand. Movie froze in mid-scene. The bang that followed was heavy, deliberate, something slapping the living room window. Sadie sprang to her feet, hackles bristling, yet she did not bark. Jack, nearest the pane, crept forward, angled 2 fingers to separate slats. His throat made a small noise like air punched from lungs. I joined his side. Alyssa stayed planted, but leaned for view. Pressed against the exterior glass were 2 appendages. Fingers, though the word feels wrong because they lacked intermediate joints that give human digits shape. Imagine 2 tapered lengths of sinew and bone, each ending in claws the length of steak knives. The claws canted slightly inward as if perfected for grasping or piercing. No thumb. No matching trio to make a hand symmetrical. Just two monstrous fingers spread wide, pads suctioned to glass, nails leaving faint scratches as they shifted for leverage. Beyond those claws rose a forearm corded with muscle, skin the color of weathered ash. Sparse tufts of bristles sprouted along the limb. Inches higher, in the murk beyond illumination, glowed twin eyes. They burned sulfurous yellow, set wider apart than any predator I knew. The height of the face, judged against sighting lines, must have been near 9 feet. Moonlight caught raised bone ridges over each eye, a glimpse of nostril, a crease where lips might hide. The rest blurred in darkness, though the sense of something massive close enough to fog the window with breath struck harder than detail. Time warped. The creature emitted a caw that morphed into a rasping laugh identical to the dog in pain sound earlier. The claws drum-tapped once, then slammed. Glass spider webbed under impact. Jack yelled a curse. I felt Alyssa's fingernails dig my arm. Another slam, harder. The central pane bowed. I saw my reflection fracture among cracks. At that exact moment, headlights arced around the corner, my father's pickup turning onto the driveway. The bright beams washed across vinyl siding, caught the figure square. What happened next defies ordinary physics. The creature did not drop to all fours or sidestep. It simply jerked sideways in a motion too abrupt for full comprehension, like a film frame cut out and replaced with empty background. One heartbeat it existed, the next it occupied air 10 feet distant. The next it had vanished into the darkness, where the yard merges into saplings. No rustle of leaves afterward, no fading footfalls. Only the cracked glass and our locked muscles proved anything had stood there. The front door banged. Dad called hello, dragging a roller suitcase. He saw our faces, then the window. Words collided between us, all of us talking at once. Claws, scream, gray skin, gone. Mom, already dialing 911, described attempted break-in by unknown animal or intruder. Dad checked the porch, then the yard, shining his phone light across mulch. He found scuffs in the soil under the window, but no tracks like paws or boots. The police arrived, took statements, chalked it up to a prank gone violent, maybe teenagers with fake rubber claws. Glass replacement scheduled. Insurance forms filled. Officers left, shaking heads. I tried to sleep, pretended reassurance, but adrenaline carved hours from the night. Sometime before dawn, I heard the whining cry again, fainter now, drifting from deeper woods beyond the creek. Dad found me standing at my bedroom window. He glanced without comment at my pallor. I mumbled thanks for arriving when he did. He shrugged, said God's timing beats ours. The next afternoon, Mom spied a dusty smear on their second-story bedroom window. A print like a hand, but only 2 wide fingers ending in longer smudges where claws would have tipped. That glass sits 14 feet above the patio. Dad installed motion-activated floodlights around the perimeter, mounted 4 security cameras with night vision, and hammered a new privacy fence along the back lot line. Footing the bill left him grumbling yet determined. Within a week, contractors replaced the smashed pane and reinforced frames. Home returned to appearing ordinary. Appearances do not mend nerves. Each night since, if I visit my parents, I hear phantom whines threading through cricket chorus. Jack, who swore never to speak of that thing again, texts sometimes after midnight admitting he glimpses movement at his window too, but always too quick for cameras. Alyssa avoids sitting near glass. Dad rechecks camera feeds each morning. Nothing significant ever shows. Neighbors blame coyotes or the occasional black bear sighting. I study wildlife field guides. Nothing matches 2 uncloven claws, 9-foot stature, gray hide, sick laughter. Skinwalker and Wendigo websites clutter my browser history. Folklore warns that naming a creature can invite it, so I avoid labels. What I know is simple. Something prowled our yard, learned the sound of human voices, mimicked a dog's cry to lure curiosity, and displayed enough intelligence to sabotage attempts at explanation. My parents' property line may sport fresh fences and LED lights, but beyond them, the woods remain thick and patient. I no longer step outside at night unless company stands shoulder to shoulder beside me. Sadie senses my change. She whines at the back door when dusk drops. Friends tease that teenagers exaggerate. Maybe stress twists memory. Glass cracks can be measured, though. Camera logs prove lights flared exactly 12:41 a.m. Police reports record rattled voices. Long after the popcorn bowls were washed, after the security installation trucks drove away, I stood in morning sun and traced the faint scratches on the new living room window. Twin arcs etched by something harder than tempered glass. My reflection split around those lines. I found no comfort in pretending they were prank marks. Some truths you accept like splinters. Small, sharp, embedded until time pushes them deeper. Or you learn to live with the ache. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I have tried to sort every detail in my memory so the story runs as naturally as it happened, without sounding like a bad campfire tale. Nothing here is exaggerated on purpose. If anything, I will probably tone the fear down because words never capture the way your nerves buzz when you are staring at something that should not exist. I was broke when the rent on my first apartment shot up. The complex was old, the walls thin, but the management upgraded the lobby and decided a fresh coat of paint justified a $200 jump. I did the math, saw my checking balance, and packed before the next billing cycle. The cheapest place I found was a one-bedroom on the edge of the industrial district, past the railroad spur where warehouses tangle with chain-link fences and empty lots. The building used to be family housing for a light bulb factory before zoning pushed most heavy industry to the suburbs. Now it stands 5 stories tall, brick soot-stained, full of tenants who keep to themselves. I signed a 6-month lease because the paperwork did not require a cosigner and utilities were rolled into the rent. The price break came with trade-offs. The new apartment was nearly 4 miles from the medical records company where I worked evenings, exactly 1 transfer beyond bus routes that run after midnight. I could not afford car payments, so every late shift ended with 40 minutes of walking under flickering streetlights. I managed for 3 weeks before a supervisor cut back hours. That pay gap, even small, meant choosing between groceries and phone service, so I quit and started looking for something closer. I found it at a 7,400-gallon Shell station, half a mile from my building. The job paid a little above minimum. No one else wanted graveyard. That suited me fine because even when I was a kid, my brain clicked on around sunset and hummed until sunrise. The station's overnight slot, midnight to 8, meant no managers hovering, no rush of commuters tossing credit cards across the counter. I would run inventory, mop, and slide 6-packs to occasional drunks through a night window. Training went smoothly, 1 week on day shift shadowing a senior clerk. The store manager, a man named Carson who wore aftershave strong enough to taste, promised I would inherit the night schedule as soon as my till balanced. The first time he printed my solo roster, I laughed. Not from nerves, but the shock of good timing. I would finally earn enough to stop counting pennies for coffee. I bought Bluetooth headphones to break boredom, downloaded podcasts about unsolved mysteries, and stowed a battered Calvin and Hobbes compilation under the counter for slow hours. The gas station sits alone on a corner lot. Each wall is glass from chest height to ceiling, much like the storefront in The Mist, one wide fluorescent box inviting highway insects. A single streetlight stands near the diesel pump island, throwing harsh white across cracked pavement. Behind the store stretches a vacant parcel where a house once burned. Only foundation stones remain under weeds, sumac, and wild grapevines. The lot became a hangout for teenagers who trail blunt smoke and litter cans, but no one tries hard to keep them out. They vanish when police cruise by. On the first Sunday of my solo shift, I left my apartment at 11:45, headphones tucked around my neck, baton collapsed in my hoodie pocket. The baton, a gift from a cousin in private security, clicks to full length in one wrist flick. The neighborhood has a reputation. Carrying pepper spray or worse is common. The air that night smelled of creosote from railroad ties and distant rain. Haze smeared the moon, but the sidewalk was bright enough for comfort. I pressed play on a true crime episode and expected my usual adrenaline kick from narration about evidence bags and missing persons. Static screeched through both earpieces. It sounded as if someone tore heavy paper next to a microphone. I stopped walking, pushed the jack deeper into my phone, but the noise hissed louder. Bluetooth disconnected. I toggled settings. Nothing changed. I removed the headphones, held them at arm's length, and the static hung in the air. No modulation. When I unplugged the cord, the phone speaker returned to normal. I tried a different song. No issue. When I plugged the headphones back in, static again, only this time a chill needled the back of my neck, the prickly sense of being watched. I pivoted slowly, scanning brick facades, dim windows, rusted fire escapes. No shapes, no footfalls. The street was empty except for leaves fluttering around a storm grate. I resumed walking. 5 steps later, the same dread coiled tight. I turned quicker and caught motion in the weeds of the abandoned lot, a shape ducking behind a tangle of bushes. City ordinance forces property owners to mow empty parcels twice per year. Otherwise, the vegetation reaches chest height. What I glimpsed stood taller than the brush, maybe 6 feet, maybe more. But whatever crouched disappeared before details registered. The silhouette bent too sharply, almost folding at the waist, unlike any homeless person seeking privacy. Yet rational thought insisted that must be the answer. Someone lighting up, too embarrassed to be spotted. I increased my pace and pocketed the headphones. The gas station canopy glowed 2 blocks ahead, its sodium lamps buzzing like hornets. Familiar fluorescent glare spilled through plate glass. I exhaled relief. Carson had already left for the night, so I knocked on the back door. The evening clerk, Marcy, handed me keys, thumbed off her apron, and vanished into her Corolla. I locked both doors, a steel slab in back and the double glass swish in front, then dropped the safety bars. Only the bullet-resistant night window remained open. A waist-high panel with a sliding hatch where customers pay after hours. The rules are simple. You see a face, you keep the door locked, you pass items in the trough, accept payment, and watch for handguns. After cash drops and a quick inventory, the station fell into hush. Refrigeration compressors hummed, a clock ticked. I read 2 Calvin and Hobbes pages and laughed aloud at Hobbes ambushing Calvin off the front porch. 12:30 ticked by. 1 a.m. None came for cigarettes or microwave burritos, not even the club kids who stopped for energy drinks. I treated myself to a lukewarm coffee and laced it with half and half that expired yesterday. Night settled like a heavy blanket. At 2:10, the security lights flickered. Overhead fluorescence dimmed to amber for half a breath, flared, then dimmed again. The emergency ballast kicked on. Half the ceiling tubes went dark, leaving stripes of gloom. I set the coffee down, unplugged the phone charger, and headed for the electrical panel in back, half expecting a tripped breaker. Before rounding the candy aisle, I glanced through the glass storefront toward the pumps. Under the farthest lamp stood a figure cloaked in what looked like a charcoal trench coat reaching mid-shin. The coat's collar rose high enough to hide the lower face. Even with halogen glare, the head seemed oddly featureless, as if light slid off skin rather than reflecting. The shape raised its arm. The wave was deliberate, 5 long seconds, palm outward. I hesitated, then lifted my own hand because ignoring a greeting felt weirdly rude even with glass between us. The figure lowered its arm, watched, did not move otherwise. Fine. Every kind of loner wanders overnight lots. I shrugged and ducked into the supply corridor. The panel showed no tripped breakers. The emergency circuit switch must have caught a momentary sag from the grid. I toggled it off and on. Lights brightened again. When I returned to the sales floor, the pump island was empty. No trench coat, no foot traffic. I chalked it up to a bored history student hitching rides. Lights stayed steady 20 minutes before dimming once more, this time to near darkness. The HVAC blower died. Electronic beep from a refrigerator sputtered out. Total silence fell so thick it pressed my eardrums. My phone flashlight carved a narrow cone through aisles lined with snack bags. I again headed for the breaker closet, but something inside me nagged. Call Carson first. File maintenance, follow procedure. I slid out the phone. No service. The carrier shows half bars throughout the neighborhood most nights. Dead zero now. My thumb hovered to retry, but a metallic thunk from the front glass yanked attention away. I spun, beam swerving. The trenchcoat figure stood inches beyond the double doors, pale face exposed. What I saw stopped breath. Imagine skin colored like the inside of a bruise, grayish blue, veins shadowed beneath thin vellum. The scalp was hairless, the brow smooth and too tall. Where nose and mouth belonged, only slight ridges hinted at anatomy. The flesh looked molded from clay, smoothed before detail added. Eyes, however, were vivid, a ring of electric blue encircling bottomless black centers. No whites, no pupils contracting. They glowed faintly, self-lit like watch dials, and there was the mouth, or what served that function. It stretched impossibly wide, corner to corner, teeth small, pointed, all identical. The grin never slackened. I could not will legs to move. The being raised one hand, pressed it flat against the glass. Fingers lacked nails, instead curved black claws extended half an inch beyond each tip. The other arm lifted, gesturing with slow precision toward the beef jerky rack. It tapped the item on its side of the glass as if counting seconds, then pointed at me. The grin remained fixed. Something clicked, a stupid retail instinct. The customer apparently wanted to buy jerky. I croaked. "You want that?" My words fogged a patch on the glass. The creature nodded once, stiff. Trying not to shake, I grabbed 2 pouches of teriyaki beef and approached the hatch. As I slid the small door open, the creature stepped back exactly far enough to keep its toes on the sidewalk line. Its long face tilted, watching each motion. I placed the jerky in the steel trough and awaited payment, though none came. It leaned down until those glowing eyes filled the window. Breathing sounded wet, labored, close to the hum of an ancient radiator. I smelled something faint but sour. Mold? Decay? Before fresh panic exploded, the lights inside the store blinked out entirely. My phone flashlight flickered in confusion. Total black devoured me so quickly I felt suspended in tar. In that instant, a scraping across the hatch metal rang. When the emergency fluorescence sputtered back on, a single claw rested inside the open slot, curling upward like a beckoning finger. I stumbled backward, baton in hand, extended with a snap. My voice cracked, but I yelled the first threat that came. "I will break your hand." The claw withdrew. Silence again, punctuated by my lungs pumping air too fast. The creature backed 1 step, 2, then it performed an unsettling gesture. It raised its right arm, index finger, middle finger, and ring finger extended, pinky and thumb folded. 3 digits. Was it counting? Warning? The claws clicked together once, and the figure glided backward into the dark edges of the lot, its outlines swallowed by brush. The rest of the shift crawled. Lights continued to burn erratically, but never failed completely. No vehicles pulled in. Dawn's gray washed across the storefront without ceremony. At 7:50 a.m., Marcy banged the back door. I let her in, babbled half a story about a break-in attempt by 2 big men wielding bats. She froze, scanned jerky strewn on the floor, noted the cracked bolts on front doors. When Carson arrived, I told a cleaner version. I scared off would-be burglars by locking the place down and swinging my baton through the hatch. Carson ordered new tempered glass, wrote up maintenance for the security lights, phoned the police. The responding officer glanced at the glass, took notes, shrugged. No security footage exists from overnight. The system tapes over itself every 24 hours, and cameras outside the doors malfunctioned months earlier. I slept 4 hours restless, then woke under the weight of dread. If the creature's 3-finger sign meant 3 days, what did I expect to happen next? Another visit? A worse escalation? I scoured online forums. Wendigo lore popped first. Cannibal frost spirits, tall, gray, impossibly thin. Skinwalkers came up. Navajo witches wearing animal forms. European folklore offered strigoi, ghouls, night hags, yet none matched a hairless blue-gray thing with smile like parted razors and reptilian feet. Though tired, I stayed awake reading until shoulders ached. Night 2, I carried salt, a makeshift talisman learned from far-flung myth sites. I sprinkled a line across the doorway inside. Flickering lights returned once around 1:30 but steadied. A single trucker bought black coffee at 3:25. No trench coat, no claws. Dawn relieved me. Night 3 arrived. Half of me prayed the sign was empty gesture, half prepared for unexplainable. At 2:59, the lights died fully again. Phone torch in hand, I stepped behind the counter, hard a hammer. Moonlight through glass gave faint silhouettes outside. Nothing stood at the pumps. I waited. At 3:02, soft breathing fogged one pane. The tall shape hunched inches from the salt line. It tapped the glass gently, tap, 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 then slid a single claw down until metal squealed. The sound lifted hair on my arms. I raised the baton. The creature's grin widened, revealing additional rows of teeth nested behind the first set like shark jaws. It pointed once more at the jerky rack, then at me. I realized hunger maybe drove it, but why come here? Why not hunt in the woods? I scanned options. Hand over food, hope it leaves. Refuse, risk violence. Remembering horror movies where appeasing monsters only emboldens them, I shook my head. No, my voice quivered. The thing's glow eyes narrowed. It pressed one claw against its own palm, drew an invisible line, then placed 3 claws on the glass, 3 again, and tapped them in measured rhythm. I remained stone still. It snarled, an almost human, wordless reproach, turned and walked toward the wooded lot. Halfway across asphalt, it vanished as before, blinked from existence. Sunrise felt like absolution. After shift, I bought motion sensor security cameras, installed them under Carson's half-hearted blessing. 2 nights later, playback caught only raccoons. The blue-gray creature never appeared again. Yet headphones still crackle static if I walk past the abandoned lot. And sometimes, crossing that stretch on my way home, I feel breath at my back. I grip the baton, turn slow, see nothing, only weeds bending under weight that has already slipped away. If 3 claws meant 3 chances, maybe it chose to leave now that its warning expired. Maybe. I still lock the front doors an hour before policy requires and triple bolt the back. I shelved salt under every window. Jerky sales have noticeably declined. Shelf after shelf of vacuum-sealed strips untouched, as if something claimed them first and refuses to return because a stubborn clerk said no. I was born and raised in a town so small that most maps did not bother to mark it. Locals called it a town because we had a post office, a single traffic light, and a diner where the coffee never tasted quite right unless you added too much sugar. But outsiders would have seen only a scattering of houses and barns along the same narrow road that the highway bypassed 60 years ago. The nearest interstate lay more than an hour away. The place sat in a soft fold of southern Missouri, surrounded by gentle hills and hardwood forest that changed from green to bronze every October and back to green again each April. It was a fine place to grow up if you loved silence, wide skies, and the warm smell of turned soil after a storm. It was not so wonderful if you craved movie theaters, steady cell phone service, or classmates who were not also your cousins. I fell somewhere between those 2 extremes. I loved the woods that wrapped our farm on 3 sides. I disliked how far away everything felt whenever my parents got into an argument, so loud even the cattle grew quiet. Our farm covered 200 acres, most of it pasture broken by thin stands of oak, sycamore, and persimmon. My father ran cattle for a living, and my mother raised goats and chickens to fill spare hours. Life ran on the same rhythm as the seasons. Calves in spring, haying in summer, harvest in fall, repairing everything frost tore apart in winter. When I was 11, my parents' marriage started to crack for reasons they never shared in full. I remember only tones, the way Dad's voice grew tight whenever a bill came in the mail, the way Mom clattered dishes into the sink as if each plate was to blame for something. By the time I reached 13, the arguments had sharpened into shapes strong enough to slice through doors, and one gray January morning, Dad packed half his clothes, put a handshake on my shoulder, and drove his rusted pickup down the lane without glancing into the rearview mirror. A month later, Mom told me we were selling most of the livestock and moving into an apartment on the north edge of town. She said it would be temporary, a chance for her to find steadier work until we sorted legal papers, but I could tell from the way she folded my old 4-H ribbons into a cardboard box that she did not believe the promise herself. The first evening in that apartment hit me harder than any cold front ever had. We traded wind sweeping across hayfields for the rattle of window units and distant bass thumping from cars that idled in the parking lot. The second night was worse because I realized the woods no longer began at the edge of our backyard. They sat 5 miles away behind someone else's fences. My mother worked 2 jobs, morning shift at the diner, late shift at a grocery stockroom. We crossed paths briefly between her shifts, long enough for her to hug me, hand me a plate of leftovers, and remind me to finish homework. Otherwise, I was alone. When weekends arrived, I did what any kid who missed dirt under his boots would do. I called my older cousins and begged for rides to their property 15 miles outside town. They lived on what had been my great-uncle's land, a rougher, steeper spread than ours, with hills thickly forested and 4x4 trails weaving through draws where coyote dens peppered the banks. Coyote hunting became our shared obsession. Officially, we called it night hunting, though the adults in the valley would have called it irresponsible if they had known how often we slipped out after sunset. My cousins, Bryce and Dylan, were 3 years older than I, tall and wiry, with the easy confidence that comes from fixing one's own truck brakes and riding horseback since preschool. They both carried semi-automatic .22 rifles their dad had bought at the farm auction, wood stocks worn shiny at the grip, scopes dialed in tight enough to flick a bottle cap off a fence post at 50 yards. I owned a Henry lever action .22, passed down by my grandfather, a rifle that kicked almost nothing, yet felt solid in my hands. We argued playfully about firepower, but the truth was none of us needed bigger calibers for the thin-bodied coyotes that roamed our county. A steady hand and a clear line of fire mattered more than brand names. At 14, I had one skill that sometimes set me ahead of my older cousins. I could read sign on the ground. Fresh tracks, tufts of fur, the pattern of bent grass where an animal had bedded down overnight. My father taught me because he believed every ranch kid should know how to trail a stray calf or a wounded deer if the freezer depended on getting that meat home. After he left, I practiced alone, walking creek beds to read whatever hoofprints the dew exposed. That quiet practice calmed my mind when my parents' shouting could be heard even in my room. By the time Bryce nicknamed me Hawkeye, I had already learned how to spot the difference between dog scat and coyote scat, and could guess the weight of a raccoon by the depth of its toe marks. My cousins joked that my tracking would make up for my lever gun's small magazine. I replied that if they would slow down and aim instead of spraying lead like movie commandos, they might match my accuracy percentage, and we laughed, because that is what teenagers do when pretending confidence. Shortly after the divorce papers were signed, Bryce and Dylan invited me to spend the first weekend of October sleeping in a field cabin their dad built at the back of the property. We decided to turn it into a 2-night campout. Cook beans over a small stove, tell jokes, then saddle their horses and ride out after dark to try calling coyotes under a 3/4 moon. The plan sounded perfect. We packed lightly: bedrolls, mess kits, a battery lantern, rifles, water, and roughly 150 rounds of ammunition each. That many cartridges felt like overkill, more than enough to fend off any coyote pack that might appear. But in the dark of teenage bravado, more bullets equaled more bravery. We loaded the gear into saddlebags and rode out just before dusk on a Friday. The horses sensed something long before we did. They danced under us, snorting at shadows, even though twilight still held a band of roselight over the ridge. I chalked it up to the drop in temperature. Horses spook easily on the first cold nights. By the time full night swallowed the ridge lines, we had reached the cabin, staked the horses to a long picket line, and stoked a small cook fire. Stars speckled the sky like frost. Dylan wanted coffee even though caffeine hardly touched him. Bryce unpacked a coyote collar reed and practiced until I begged him to quit or else call in every angry buck within 5 miles. We laughed, dragged our bedrolls onto the grass outside the cabin, and watched Orion climb above the treetops. Not long after 9, we doused the fire, swung into the saddles, and guided the geldings toward the deeper forest. Each of us carried one rechargeable flashlight, plus a headlamp clipped to our hat brims, but we kept them dimmed so our eyes could adjust. Once under the timber canopy, moonlight vanished almost entirely. We separated enough that the horses did not stumble over one another, yet stayed close enough that whispered jokes carried. The forest floor swallowed hoofbeats, and insects thrummed a steady background note. After roughly 30 minutes, we paused at a small clearing so Bryce and Dylan could dismount and relieve themselves. I kept one boot in the stirrup, patting my horse's neck, scanning tree trunks for eyeshine. Crickets chirped and owls called. Then, between one breath and the next, the night turned silent, as if someone snapped a switch. A hush in the woods usually means a predator is near. Even at 14, I knew enough ecology to understand that rabbits and insects fall quiet when a larger hunter walks the leaves. I signaled to my cousins. They zipped and buckled. We waited. Far across the clearing, through a gap in the underbrush, a faint ember pulsed, reddish at first, then dimming to almost black. It looked like the ghost of a campfire, embers buried under ash. None of us recognized it. Trespassers occasionally slipped onto the property to poach deer, but who would camp so far from a vehicle in early October? I whispered what I saw. Bryce jerked his rifle toward the glow. With headlamps still off, we nudged the horses in that direction, weaving between saplings until the smell of iron wafted into my nostrils, coppery and metallic. 50 yards closer, shapes became clearer. A low circle of stones marked the remains of a fire pit. Around it, on bark and lichen-covered rock, dark liquid spattered thick. I dismounted and crouched. Blood, bright in moonlight, still tacky. Whoever had built the fire must have slaughtered something here. Maybe a deer, though why so much blood on the trees? What froze me was not the blood, but the symbols. Carved or smeared onto 8 surrounding trunks were crude star shapes, 5 points, each enclosed by a circle. Some lines doubled, others splintered like someone dragged a claw through wet paint. I breathed the word pentagram, though that was not exactly right. Some shapes held 6 points, others looked like misshapen asterisks. None of us belonged to a faith that frightened easily, but every kid in rural Missouri hears stories about backyard Satanists and drug cults hiding in barns. Superstition or not, the setup felt wrong. We should go, I said. Black magic or a prank? I don't care. This is trouble. Bryce's flashlight swept across a fresh smear leading away from the clearing. No way, someone's bleeding or dragging something. Let's track it. Could be poachers on our land. Reluctance warred with necessity. I needed them to get back. They insisted I guide. My tracking itch overtook caution. The blood trail angled downhill, single file, droplets widening into smears as if a body or carcass slid over leaves. Every 2 or 3 yards the pattern repeated. A brush, a drag, silence. I led, crouched to check each patch. The farther we walked, the keener my unease grew. The forest no longer felt like the same forest I had known all my life. Air pressed heavier. The horses, usually bold, balked, ears pinned and whites showing. When Bryce tugged reins, they skittered sideways. He whispered curses, stroked their necks. The moment realization hit me remains clearest of the night. The blood trail was no accident. Whoever planned the ritual, or whatever it was, had doused the clearing, then walked into the forest, knowing someone might follow. We had accepted bait. I spun to warn my cousins. Before words left my lips, a scream tore through the trees. It sounded half human, half beast, higher than any man's voice, longer than any bobcat wail. My horse reared. I lost a stirrup and crashed backward onto damp leaves. My cousins screamed, one curse word each, and their horses exploded in opposite directions. Horses see in low light better than humans. Maybe they glimpsed shapes we missed. Mine bolted, saddlebag flapping, leaving me half stunned on the ground. I scrambled up, lever gun in hand, heart thrashing. Bryce's flashlight beam danced wildly 30 yards east, Dylan's flickered to the west. Before we could regroup, another scream cut the night closer, rawer, followed by heavy footsteps crashing through undergrowth. We reacted by instinct, each man for himself, bolting in 3 separate vectors. That was mistake 1. I ran blind, branches whipping my arms until adrenaline burned out and I found myself alone in darkness. I clicked the headlamp. Pale LED showed a dry creek bed that drained toward our camp field. Relief flooded me. I followed the shallow channel south until the cabin's tin roof glinted faintly. I reached camp winded, throat raw, half expecting Bryce and Dylan already there, but their horses stood alone, sides heaving, reins tangled. Both tents yawned empty. Shame flooded next. I had abandoned my cousins, the only family who stuck close after the divorce. I loaded every cartridge from my saddlebags into coat pockets, 3 50-round boxes, took a small LED lantern, and headed back out. Tracking in daylight is art. At night with only a headlamp it is madness. Still, I could follow broken ferns and fresh scrapes where Bryce's mount had charged through. I whispered apologies to the night for running earlier. 10 minutes later, a gunshot exploded to my right, sharp, followed by a cry that choked off fast. I snapped the lever down, chambered around, sprinted toward the sound. My feet slipped on pine needles. Twice I slammed hip into trunks. Each impact fired pain up ribs, but I kept running. The beam of my headlamp caught boots swinging. Bryce hung upside down from a rope looped over a branch, ankles bound, arms slack. A dark stain spread across his jacket's chest. I smelled cordite. He had emptied his semi-auto. The rifle lay on the ground below him, magazine jammed halfway out. When I lifted the beam, movement behind the trunk froze me. A figure sidled into view, towering, gaunt, body covered in sparse gray fur. Its legs bent backward at the knee like a canine's, but its torso stood erect. One arm ended not in a paw but a broad hand with two grotesquely long fingers and a vestigial thumb tucked high like a dew claw. Claws the length of steak knives glistened. When it saw me, it did not gnash or roar. It smiled, a sickening stretch of gums full of narrow teeth, same grin I would see again later. Then it spoke in a voice deep as gravel, almost amused. "Drop it." No accent, no growl, just those two words, perfectly shaped, rattling in a throat not designed for human language. I thought I might faint. Instead, rage boiled up louder than terror. Rage that it mocked English while my cousin bled out overhead. I yelled, swung the rifle from the hip, and fired as fast as I could lever rounds. 16 shots hammered the night, brass casings spinning. Every slug hit. I saw dark fluid spurt from fur, saw its chest jerk, saw the grin falter. The creature staggered, then toppled sideways, one arm smashing saplings. I reloaded, expecting it to leap back up, but it shuddered, convulsed, went still. I inched closer until the stench, sour, moldy earth, deep rot, drove me back. Still wary, I slung the rifle, climbed the branch, cut Bryce down. He coughed when blood rushed back to his head. He was unconscious but breathing. I could not carry him far, but adrenaline gave me strength to haul him over shoulders in a fireman's carry, rifle clattering against my spine. Half stumbling, half running, I reached camp and laid him inside his tent, staunching chest wounds with spare shirts. He breathed shallow. No phone service meant no ambulance. Maybe shock blocked my tears because I felt only a hard numbness. Leaving Bryce alone felt wrong, but Dylan was still somewhere. After binding Bryce as best I could with gauze and tape from our horse pack, I grabbed another magazine, jammed it into my rifle, and marched back into the woods. The moon had shifted behind clouds, dew slicked leaves. Every distant rustle sounded like claws. I tracked Dylan's boot prints down a different slope until rope fibers glinted ahead. He hung the same way, ankles bound, arms limp, unconscious but breathing. No monster lurked nearby this time. I cut him down swiftly, dragged him by the arms, then firemen carried him too, sweat chilling on my back. 40 minutes later, both cousins lay side by side under blankets. Their pulses felt steady. I prayed silently, foxhole prayers, the kind you do not admit later. I sat outside between tents, rifle across knees, and watched dawn seep into sky. Bryce woke first. He pressed fingers to patched ribs, winced, asked what truck had hit him. Dylan stirred next, complained about pounding temples. Neither remembered hanging from trees. They recalled splitting up when the scream came and little else. I considered telling them every detail but hesitated, maybe from shock, maybe because words felt flimsy. I said they fell from horses, got tangled in vines, and I found them knocked out. I promised to explain later. They accepted the half-lie because explaining concussions seemed easier than explaining creatures with lamp-glow eyes. We never recovered my horse or the monster's body. By noon, Bryce's father arrived with the stock trailer to fetch us after my distress call finally reached civilization. He found the horses grazing near a fence line a mile away, skittish but unharmed. He found spent casings under the hanging trees, found broken branches, found dried blood where the creature fell, but no corpse, no tracks leading away. He suggested coyotes might have dragged it off. I said nothing. My cousins healed. Doctors credited bruised ribs, mild concussions, dehydration. I kept more serious truths locked away. Some nights, memory barges in. I see that grin pressed against gas station glass, even though the monster in Missouri had a broader muzzle than the creature behind the storefront, even though logic tells me they cannot be the same. Maybe they share a lineage, something older than folklore, roaming backcountry creeks and lonely city blocks where power flickers. I still carry the Henry lever action. I keep 3 loaded tubes taped beneath my bed frame. When night wind slides through apartment shutters, I press palms against ears, listening for unearthly screams followed by silence. Chronology says the Missouri creature died under 16.22 slugs. Doubt says creatures from places we do not map do not die so easily. Every maple branch scratching my roof could be claws. Every flicker in overhead bulbs could mean something, watching, smiling, and counting. 1 finger, 2, then 3, before stepping forward to test locks again. do not expect anyone to take my word on faith alone, because I understand how outrageous a story sounds when someone begins talking about UFOs and creatures that are clearly not listed in any wildlife field guide. Still, I am tired of swallowing the memories night after night. I decided to put everything down in writing, with every last detail I can recall, so that if anyone else ever sees the same lights or crosses paths with the same towering figure in the timber, they will know they are not the first to face it. Everything you read here is exactly as it happened, and I have left out nothing except the full names of a few people who would rather not be dragged into my account. My cousin Dakota will appear often, so I shorten his name to DK. He and I grew up almost like brothers, wandering the deep woods that surround land between the lakes. Most folks shorten that sprawling recreation area to 3 letters, LBL. Even today, when I roll certain memories around in my head, I can taste the place. The sharp tang of oak leaves after a rain, the syrupy aroma of pine sap when the sun bakes the bark, the ghost hickory smoke from campfires that burned low long before dawn. The events I need to tell you about divide into 2 periods of my life. The first happened when I was about 8 years old, still young enough to stare at the treetops and think every squirrel was living out a secret fairy story. The second took place 10 or 11 years later, when I was 18, edging into 19, old enough to carry a pair of decent knives, old enough to think that my favorite music piped through cheap earbuds could drown out anxiety. By then I understood that the forest is not a children's picture book. It is a long, whispering corridor where things, ordinary and extraordinary, watch from behind trunks and wait for night to settle. Back when I was 8, a long summer weekend at our family's LBL campsite meant pure freedom. My cousins, DK included, would chase each other through tall grass beside the lake, hunt crawfish in the shallows, race the ATV up sandy hills, and roast so many marshmallows our stomachs ached. My parents owned one of those small, wind-up, disposable cameras. If you are over 30, you may remember them. Point-and-shoot plastic rectangles preloaded with a tiny roll of film, maybe 15 shots per camera. No preview screen, no chance to delete the bad ones. If the day's sunlight was bright enough, those little cameras could capture memories better than any phone picture. Partly because every click of the shutter felt special. My mother handed me one on that particular trip and warned we had only a handful of exposures, so I promised myself I would save them for the truly important moments. Whatever that meant to an excited 8-year-old in cut-off jeans. Daylight hours rolled by. I snapped a shot of DK making a clay turtle, another of my uncle balancing half a dozen hot dogs in one hand while flipping burgers with the other. By the time evening approached, I had only one exposure left. Dusk settled over the lake like ink swirling in clear water. The grown-ups set up camp chairs around the fire ring and popped open cans of cheap beer. DK and I drifted a short distance away from the flicker of flames to escape the glare every time my camera flash went off. We sat cross-legged on cool dirt, trading guesses about the next day's adventures. At that age, we measured happiness in ounces of dirt under our fingernails and knew scratches on our shins. While DK spoke, I stared absent-mindedly at the sky and froze. A brilliant orb the color of polished ivory floated above the tree line. At first, my brain said moon, because children's brains reach for known shapes, but the moon that night was a fat half-crescent climbing slowly in the opposite direction. This shining sphere dwarfed every full moon I had seen and glided, smooth as if dragged along a pane of glass, westward across the stars. No blinking aircraft lights, no contrail, no engine hum. Only emptiness around a silent globe that looked close enough for a tall man to graze with his fingertips. I whispered DK's name. He glanced up, and the change in his face told me he saw it too. He sprang to his feet, waving for the adults, but their laughter and clinking bottles drowned him out. I lifted the camera, thumb poised on the button. The orb drifted behind the highest branches of a scraggly oak, and though I tried to angle for a shot, the camera refused to cooperate. The shutter jammed, clicking uselessly, while the flash failed to charge. I slammed the cheap plastic body against my palm. Nothing. The tree swallowed the orb, and in the next heartbeat, it was gone. Not hidden, truly vanished. The air felt oddly still once the light disappeared, as if the night, for a moment, had held its breath. I swung my gaze across the heavens but could not locate the half moon. When DK turned back, shaking his head at the unresponsive adults, I mumbled that the camera must be broken. I knew deep down the jam was no random malfunction. Something did not want its picture taken. DK and I almost never mention that evening. Yet each time we meet, our eyes flicker with unspoken understanding. That night changed childhood boundaries. One moment the universe felt familiar. The next it held a silent object that bent every rule. I did not know then that unanswered questions would hover for a decade before the forest answered again, this time in a voice made of breath, claws, and glinting eye shine. Skip ahead 10 years to a night when everything in my life had slipped sideways. I had finished high school, watched friends scatter to jobs, to college dorms, to marriages that seemed rushed. I stayed behind to care for my mother, whose health had started eroding under the slow pressure of sadness and unpaid bills. I worked day labor when I could find it, hauling lumber at a mill, breaking pallets, scrubbing motel bathrooms. Depression is a quiet predator. You do not hear it padding up behind until its weight lands heavy across your shoulders. On one raw February afternoon, the despair felt too thick. I grabbed my boots, belted on 2 knives, more psychological armor than practical, and slipped out. Whenever hopeless thoughts spiraled, the only remedy that reliably cleared my head was an hours-long walk through those same woods that once sheltered my cousins and me. I called my route the Comfort Trail. Even in darkness, the curves were tattooed on muscle memory. I knew where every root snag waited, where the creek bank dipped deepest, where soft clay pooled after rain. The thought of coyotes or bobcats did not bother me. Their habits were predictable. Humans, by contrast, are unpredictable, so I carried the knives in case I stumbled on drunk trespassers. At the trailhead, I slipped earbuds into place and cranked Skillet. Something about heavy guitar riffs and lyrics hinting at struggle and survival helped my pulse align. When I listen loud enough, the music drowns out racing thoughts. Of course, it also drowns out every warning sound a night forest might offer. That did not worry me. I trusted my path and my sense of direction. Halfway through the circuit, the band faded out between tracks and my spine tingled. People talk about the hair standing up on their necks. Mine did exactly that, a crawling electricity. Cold air pressed against my cheek. Without pausing to analyze, I acted. Yanked out the earbuds, crouched, and spun. In the same motion, I drew the larger of the 2 knives, a 7-inch hunter's blade given to me by DK, point held outward in a grip my Hapkido instructor drilled into muscle memory. 5 feet away hunched a silhouette. Even through moonless gloom, I sensed its height if it rose fully. 8 feet, perhaps more. It balanced on long hind limbs, yet used one forearm for stability, the other hand crooking near its face. No ordinary animal carries itself like that. Silence pooled between us, so thick I swear I heard my own pulse echo. Up close, the creature's features arranged themselves in unsettling fashion, neither strictly human nor strictly bestial. The torso showed muscle bands that rippled beneath charcoal skin textured like fine shark hide. Where a human might possess a pectoral span, this being's chest tapered sharply to a narrow waist, ribs faintly visible. The arms, longer in proportion than any ape's, ended in hands built for clasping prey. 2 dominant fingers thicker than broom handles, each tipped with curved claws. Above the shoulders rose a skull elongated toward the rear. Its jaw hinged enough to open wide, revealing interlocking rows of uneven teeth. I could not decide whether the skin, I refused to call it fur, was naturally smooth or whether hair follicles had withered away over time. What light existed glimmered across an oily surface. Its eyes fastened on mine. The pupils, if it had any, were impossible to discern. The irises shone a pale, milky green, like twilight filtered through sea ice, reflecting ambient starlight. We stood locked in a tableau that felt both seconds long and hours long. I imagined it reading everything about me: height, stance, fear, while I struggled to avoid blinking and losing sight of its outline. In predator-prey encounters, movement tips the balance. I planted feet, ready for a lunge. Instead, the creature performed an almost human action. Its free hand opened, palm facing me, fingers, claws, uncurled slowly as if displaying emptiness. Evidence suggests fear can flip into fascination when the brain runs out of scripts, because I noticed details at ridiculous levels. The underside of each finger bore whorls like fern fronds arranged in spirals, microscopic ridges that would grip bark or stone. I felt no immediate attack coming. Oddly, I felt no urge to run either. Had it chosen to attack, my knife would have been decoration. Yet no growl came. The creature's breathing quickened, sides expanding, as though startled that I did not flee. A thin exhalation hissed from its nostrils, higher up the face than ours, followed by a soft click deep in its throat. We stared. I forgot the weight of gravity, forgot everything except the hum ringing in my hips, a low vibration that might have been survival instinct or the resonance of something stranger passing between us. Then, in a single burst of muscle, it turned and streaked through underbrush. The speed resembled a film scene sped up. Limbs blurred, body compressed to a shadow rolling forward, and the night swallowed it. I backed 2 steps, then broke into a sprint down a line I could run blindfolded. The straight shot home. Branches cracked against my shoulders, but adrenaline dulled the sting. Only when my boots hit freshly mown grass did I skid to a halt. The porch light cast a broad circle. I wheeled, scanning tree trunks. No sound surfaced. Not one cricket or whippoorwill sang. The hush felt deeper than anything I recalled since childhood. The hush that fell after the glowing orb left LBL. My muscles shook from exertion and unspent terror. Rationality injected itself. If that creature wanted me, nothing about my knives or my sprint would have saved me. Flight had been pointless. It allowed me escape because it chose. I looked toward the trail mouth and made a vow to myself. If I crossed paths with it again, I would try to speak, because words were the only weapon left. That night I paced the yard until dawn smeared peach across the horizon. Birds resumed singing as if a master conductor flicked a baton. In daylight, everything looked normal, embarrassingly small compared to nightmares, but an imprint of unmistakable shape dented the soft earth 3 yards from where I first froze. A 2-part footprint split down the center, with 4 toe pads whose lengths implied claws. I crouched, pressed fingers into the indent. Each digit nearly matched the width of my thumb. I never photographed that print. Partly because when I rushed inside to fetch a smartphone, the sky spat rain so sudden it felt choreographed, filling the imprint with muddy water. Partly because evidence might force my family to question my sanity. I kept the story locked away, but on some nights, the ones when moonlight silvers tree bark, I returned to the comfort trail, headphones in pocket instead of on ears. If nothing else, I listen, hoping to hear a click, a hiss, any hint that the creature chose to return so we can finish whatever conversation our eyes began. My knives remain strapped at my belt out of habit, and a second, more thoughtful weapon rests in my head, a single sentence I rehearsed in the weeks after that night. I am ready to offer those words if it steps from the trees again. A greeting can carry great weight between strangers, no matter which world they hail from. I was never afraid of the woods when I was younger. Growing up on the Colorado Front Range, where the suburbs fade into open foothills and the pine-covered slopes roll up toward the Continental Divide, you get used to empty miles. A patch of ponderosa forest behind the housing development, a winding creek that slides between boulders before vanishing into a culvert, a lonesome ridge where elk bugle long after midnight. Those places were as familiar to me as the sidewalks in front of our house. My parents, Mark and Adrian, raised me with the easy confidence of people who trust nature more than they trust malls or multi-lane highways. When my friends at school spent spring break in Phoenix or Orlando, I spent it pitching canvas wall tents beside forgotten logging roads, fishing creek mouths for brook trout, and roasting marshmallows so aggressively that the sugar caught fire and flamed blue at the edges. I believed that familiarity made me safe, as if understanding the tilt of granite or the shape of a mule deer track earned me a guarantee that nothing truly terrible could happen outdoors. That illusion shattered 4 nights ago, on a quick early-season campout that should have been as ordinary as dozens of others. Mom called it a tune-up trip. The calendar still said April, but the high country remained buried under snowdrifts. Down in the lower elevations, roughly an hour southwest of our house, the Forest Service kept a handful of primitive campgrounds open year-round for the families who felt restless before school let out. Dad suggested we test our new gear, spend 2 nights under the stars, and come home in time for me to finish an overdue social studies report. I said yes because I love how lodgepole pines smell after sundown, and because the last weeks of junior year had tied my nerves into knots. Graduation still felt far away, but homework and part-time jobs, and the nagging question of whether I should follow my friends to a city college or stay local all pressed in. 48 hours without cell service seemed like a relief. We left before sunset, the bed of Dad's pickup rattling with unloaded firewood, water jugs, and a folding table that never chose to stay folded. The drive took less than an hour, west on the main highway, then up a cracked blacktop lane that once carried lumber trucks but now dead-ended in a rough loop rarely listed on tourist maps. The last half-mile wound along a shelf road gouged from soft shale. Mom gripped the handle above the passenger door and reminded Dad too loudly that the right tires were inches from sliding into space. He grinned and pretended not to hear. Beyond the drop, hillsides unrolled toward a horizon already violet with dusk. My ears popped as we gained altitude, and I remember thinking how calm the scene looked. No traffic, no aircraft contrails, no ranch lights, nothing but tree trunks fading into each other like a watercolor left in the rain. The small gravel lot at the loop's end held 3 pull-through clearings, each separated by a ragged meadow and a screen of waist-high brush. Only one clearing was taken, a rented RV glowing inside like a jack-o'-lantern. Beneath its awning flickered a blue camp stove flame and the silhouette of an older couple hunched over paper plates. Dad flashed a peace sign as we rattled past. They nodded but did not wave. Their dog, tethered near the door, thumped its tail once on the dust and then stared as we drove on. Something in those dull yellow eyes left me feeling oddly judged. We parked at the second site, the one half hidden by spruces whose lowest branches had been trimmed years earlier, leaving neat skirts that swayed without touching ground. A Forest Service sign, cracked and weather-scoured, warned campers to secure food against black bears. Dad jammed the truck into park and announced we had exactly 30 minutes of twilight before headlamps became necessary. I sprang into practiced motion, unstrapped the roll of tent poles, unlashed the tarp, stake corners, tighten cords, unpack mummy bags, fluff the down. Any Colorado kid old enough to run a propane stove knows the drill. Even so, I felt impatient, tapping nails into hardened soil, wanting to finish fast enough to take my phone out once more and photograph Venus bright in the west before coverage disappeared. A syrupy nausea tugged at the edge of my stomach, nothing like carsickness, more like when you drink water that tastes metallic and you know it is wrong before you swallow. I chalked the feeling up to adrenaline. Camping always gave me a jitter of excitement. The queasiness lasted only a minute, receded, and I forgot it while we built a cautious fire. Flames climbed tall before Dad prodded them into coals for Mom's cast iron skillet. Dinner was basic. Bratwurst blistered on the outside, sliced baguette that blackened fast, and canned beans warmed until they scabbed on top. I snapped a photograph of the pan just before Mom extinguished the lantern because the contrast of firelight against the encircling blackness looked cinematic. Only one exposure left. I saved the frame like a square of dark chocolate on a long hike. The night felt normal until 4:07 a.m. I know the exact minute because the watch strapped to my wrist beeped the hour. I blinked awake inside the tent, unzipped the hood of my sleeping bag, and looked around, disoriented. The dream I lost on waking left a taste like burned sugar, but the nausea had returned stronger, rolling up from my gut, forcing saliva into my mouth. The tent interior smelled slightly of nylon and damp socks. My parents slept on cots to my left. Dad's soft snore rose and fell like tidewater. I whispered his name in case he sensed an oncoming storm. He did not stir. Without disturbing them, I wiggled free of the bag, pulled on boots, and ducked outside for air. The sky was black enough that the Milky Way appeared as a fat white brushstroke. Cold bit my cheeks. No wind. I drew slow breaths. After perhaps half a minute, I felt the nausea ease. I turned toward the meadow's edge to find a spot fit for retching, but froze mid-step. 20 yards away, where the tree line thickened, something stood between trunks, backlit faintly by starlight. In shape, it was vaguely human but elongated, head broader at the crown, shoulders narrowing. The neck or upper torso had a weird bend as if two vertebrae extended too many inches. Its skin, or perhaps a second, loose layer covering skin, looked wrinkled, tattered, textured like burlap soaked and hung to dry. At first glance, I thought of a scarecrow propped by drunk hunters. Then the scarecrow moved. Not a full step, merely a tilt sideways, but the motion was fluid, purposeful. I gasped loudly, a child's gulp, and pulled my knit hat lower as an instinctive shield. The figure did not tilt back. Instead, it remained half-turned, as though gauging me. I prayed it did not see me, then realized how ridiculous that hope sounded given the open space. I ducked inside the tent so fast I scraped my back on the zipper teeth. My parents still breathed evenly. I convinced myself the figure was a night tree, nothing else. By dawn, I half believed the lie. All Saturday daylight, we hiked a narrow ridge trail, letting sunshine erase doubts. The next night, I sat with Dad beside embers after Mom turned in, my boots propped on a sandstone slab. A conversation about future colleges stalled, and we fell into companionable silence, staring at sparks. The watch on my wrist read 2:12 a.m., when a sound bristled through the stillness, a shriek so bright and metallic that I flinched as if struck behind the ear. It was no mountain lion scream, no fox bark, no owl screech. Those I can imitate. This noise split in two tones, high and low, overlapped, like two machines crashing gears out of tempo. Dad sucked his breath. I said the words before he did, "That's not normal." The forest never resumed its nocturnal hum. Frogs stopped chattering, and the small ground squirrels that usually scratch pine needles under stars seemed to vanish. For 3 minutes we waited, listening. The shriek did not repeat. Dad raked coals into a metal bucket and hosed them to ash. "We'll break camp first light," he murmured. We zipped into our bags, but sleep did not come. At dawn, instead of oatmeal, Mom suggested a fast granola bar breakfast and an even faster breakdown. We folded tarps, shook tents, cinched straps. My earlier eagerness had curdled into a need to be on paved road. Even Dad loaded gear with a hurry I rarely saw in him. By 8, we rolled downhill in the pickup bed, rattling like a toolbox. The nausea returned during that descent, the same uneasy swirl that had woken me Friday night, and I twisted in the rear seat to look through the cab window, half expecting the ragged figure to crest the ridge behind us. It was not there. Instead, at the last switchback before the lot disappeared behind scrub, I saw it standing 10 yards from the gravel. Eyes huge, black ringed by moist white, fixed on the truck. The shape no longer looked ambiguously human. It looked wrong. Arms too long for its frame, legs jointed backward at the knee, flesh sagging in gray folds like aged cheesecloth. I did not scream, but my hands slapped glass so hard Dad cursed, thinking I spotted a deer in the road. By the time he braked, the thing was gone, as if wind had shredded it to dust. Sunday evening at home should have calmed me. Mom set an old Western DVD on the television. She loves Clint Eastwood, and Dad grilled chicken on the patio while a gentle rain dotted the concrete. I retreated to my room, turned on my computer, and opened YouTube's algorithmic rabbit hole. Campfire horror stories, cryptid sightings, mossy oak night vision footage. One channel called Darkness Prevails loops soft instrumental music behind first-person encounters. Listening helped me put distance between reality and nightmare until 11:17 p.m. when the nausea hit again, fierce as a punch. My bedroom is on the second floor. I kicked off the blanket, slid a hoodie over my t-shirt, and padded downstairs for cold milk the way my grandmother once taught me. Half a glass, 3 Oreos, enough sugar to convince the body it is safe. The kitchen lights were off. I opened the fridge, palmed the jug, and the back door beyond the breakfast nook creaked on its hinges. We never leave it unlatched. I forgot it stood ajar from unloading supplies earlier. Rain hissed in gutters outside. I told myself Dad probably stepped out for grilling tongs, but no silhouette loomed on the porch. Poured milk dunked one cookie and the shriek returned, raw, impossibly close. It funneled through the door like an air raid siren. I dropped the glass, milk splashed my ankles, and snatched the butcher knife Mom keeps magnetized beside the stove. Not a blade for slicing bread. A blade made for quartering roasts, heavy enough to sever bird bones. Footsteps, no, appendages, tapped across tile near the laundry room. Slick points slithering as though centipede legs had grown to the size of screwdrivers. My brain bucked. Nothing natural makes that sound. I bolted up carpeted stairs 2 at a time, yelling my parents' names. Behind me the door pushed wider, hinges squealing. Mom emerged from the master bedroom, hair tousled. "What?" Before words finished, Dad followed, roused by my shouting, and the shriek erupted again, echoing up the stairwell. He registered the knife in my fist, the horror on my face, and the slow click-click on tile below. Dad yanked the attic ladder's cord, motioned Mom to climb, then dashed into his office for the pump shotgun he had not touched since the last turkey season. He stuffed shells into the magazine while backing downstairs in socked feet. I braced beside him, blade raised, though a metal kitchen utensil felt comically weak. Whatever crawled never rounded the banister's bend. The centipede-like patter ceased halfway through the foyer. Thick silence settled. Mom's phone alarm, set for pre-dawn exercise, blared from the attic crawlspace at 5 a.m. and startled us into laughter that bordered on hysteria. Dawn's safe light creeped through stained glass over the front door, and Dad swept the house room by room. No intruder. No signs of forced entry beyond the rain-dribbled threshold. Muddy water pooled below the door jamb, but no footprints marked its path. I insisted we leave. Mom phoned her sister in Denver. By mid-afternoon, we packed suitcases into the Subaru and drove south. I typed most of this account in the back seat, tapping rapid notes into a laptop before details blurred. Whenever I glance toward the Rockies, a single image overlays the ridgelines. Those enormous, lidless eyes peering through my bedroom window, hateful, patient. I do not know if the thing tracked us from the campground or if it found us by some scent we carried. I only know the nausea hits seconds before it appears, like a barometer falling before a squall. Since arriving in Denver, I have felt fine, mostly. Tonight, though, writing these last words at 2 a.m, my stomach has begun to churn in that subtle, telltale way. The apartment's balcony door stands shut. Still, I catch myself listening for click, click, click across concrete, and I wonder how large an area such a creature might claim as its hunting ground. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I never used to believe that anything truly monstrous lived in the deep woods. When you grow up in western Wisconsin, you hear hunters blame bad luck on spooks in the timber. But most of us learn by 12 years old that creaking pines and coyote yips are just background noise. By April of 2016, I was 23, a veteran of countless deer camps, proud of the fact that I could gut and quarter a buck faster than my father. If someone had told me at breakfast that an evening-long nightmare waited only a few ridges away, I would have laughed and topped off his coffee. What happened on the land outside Richland Center, that quiet farming town folded into sandstone valleys, wiped the laugh off my face. I still meet people who insist you saw a bear, or it must have been a starving wolf, and I let them talk because it is easier than arguing, but the image burned behind my eyes is no bear, no wolf, nothing that evolved to fit the tidy diagrams in a biology textbook. I can describe the location in detail. 20-odd miles from Main Street, a long gravel track curling between dairy pastures, a stand of oaks and hickory that forms a horseshoe around an old cornfield. But I will not give directions. If strangers march in there waving flashlights, whatever prowled those ridges may follow them home. My father's friend James owned the property. He kept a cinder block cabin tucked just inside the trees, 20 yards off the road. 1 room, 2 sets of bunks, a pleather couch, a little propane heater, and a television that caught syndicated sitcoms when the clouds cooperated. Beyond the cabin, the ground opened into a wide field shaped like a bowl, rimmed by the arms of that U-shaped woodlot. A rocky ridge ran through the middle of the bowl, a spine of earth, tall enough that you had to crawl on all 4s to reach the top and slide on your backside to reach the bottom. Roughly halfway between cabin wall and first oak trunk sat a tiny island of vegetation, no bigger than a backyard swimming pool. A battered metal deer stand rose above that tangle of brush. I remember the measurements because every feature played a part in what we found. On the morning of April 9th, my father James, another longtime friend named George's 17-year-old son Elliot, and I rolled down the rutted lane in a pair of pickup trucks. We hauled chainsaws, wedges, splitting mauls, a bright yellow hydraulic wood splitter, and 2 ATVs with trailers. The mission was routine. Drop every dead oak within reach, buck the trunks, haul cords back to the cabin, and stack enough firewood to feed the stove all deer season. We started cutting around 1 o'clock, the sky a flattened pewter lid that refused to warm. By sundown, we had dropped 2 hulking oaks on the left leg of the U and lost several big rounds when they tumbled into a ravine too steep for the ATV. Elliot and I spent an hour stumbling through underbrush, heaving 70-pound bolts uphill to the trailer. When the last round thudded onto the steel bed, we hiked across the field toward the glow of cabin windows. The sun balanced on the hilltops, casting our shadows across those silent trees. I noticed the silence first. No woodpecker hammering, no chickadee chatter. Wind lay flat. Even the coarse croak of crows, which never seemed to shut up at dusk, had vanished. A tightening worked through my gut. I mentioned it, but Elliot waved me off. Another half-minute brought us to the edge of the brush island. From the corner of my eye I caught motion, just a quiver of briars. Hoping for a doe easing into the open, I stared, but nothing stepped forward. The uneasy feeling crawled higher, itching between my shoulder blades. We reached the porch without another word. Inside, the night followed every deer camp routine. Frozen pizzas blistered in the propane oven, beer murmured out of cans, Jerry Springer brawled on the ancient TV. Sometime near midnight, I closed my eyes on the couch, the fleece blanket scratchy against my cheek. The blinds above me hung half open. Because I was half drunk and too lazy to close them, moonlight spilled in. An hour, maybe 2 hours later, I jerked awake needing to relieve the beer. The TV lamp had died, leaving the room cigarette smoke dark. I sat up, peeled a blanket corner away, and looked through the gap. The field gleamed silver under a full moon. At first, nothing seemed wrong. Then, at the base of the ridge, inside those tangled briars, I noticed shape. The upper shoulders of something crouched low, legs cocked outward like a bullfrog poised to jump, arms so long the knuckles brushed earth. The skin, or what I could see of it, looked like wet parchment. The head tilted from side to side, slow, deliberate, as if reading scents. I should have scrambled upstairs to wake my father, but fascination pinned me. I lifted the cheap disposable camera, thumbed the window to its last frame, squeezed the shutter. The mechanism jammed hard. I slapped the camera against my thigh, tried again, dead. The figure never glanced at me, but gooseflesh prickled from neck to ankles, and I knew it could find me if it wanted. The urge to vomit smothered me again, stronger than before. When I dared another look, the spot under the ridge was empty. I detoured to the bathroom. My bladder screamed, then crawled inside my sleeping bag on the bunk instead of returning to the exposed couch. I convinced myself exhaustion had warped a fallen branch into an ogre. Dawn's bacon perfume soothed the last jagged edge of that fear. Saturday followed the work script. James felled 2 more oaks on the east side. Our saws tore through rings while Elliot and I rolled rounds onto the ATV trailer. At the tree line's edge, the chain brake clacked and an awful copper smell flooded my nostrils. 10 steps deeper we found the coyote. It hung skewered through its throat on a limb barely chest high, guts sluiced onto snow. My stomach turned over. James cursed out loud and told us the older neighbor up the hill had been feuding recently, angry about a tree stand James erected near the property line. "Stupid bastard thinks he can scare me off," James spat. Farther in, we found more carnage. A raccoon slit stem to stern and looped through wire like a grisly Christmas ornament. 2 foxes gutted and draped across the fork of an elm. Each corpse looked days old, dried blood blackening, innards stinking in the thaw. The idea that any predator, wolf, cat, coyote, would waste that much meat made no sense. James's anger swelled into something uglier than I'd seen. He roared curses, fired the ATV, and tore uphill to confront the neighbor. Back at the field, Elliot and I hitched ourselves to the empty trailer, hauling like mules. Sweat soaked the inside of my Carhartt coat, though the air hovered just above freezing. When we reached the cabin, James's truck sat crooked, passenger door ajar. He stood near the porch, talking fast to my father and George. His voice held no anger now, only disbelief. He said the neighbor wasn't home, but every animal on the man's property, 2 German shepherds, 3 goats, a pair of ponies, lay disemboweled, entrails strung like streamers. "We gotta call the county," James muttered. Whatever's doing this ain't right. Dad stepped inside, cell phone pressed to his ear. I heard little of the conversation, just his steady, Okay. He returned pale. Because of a wrecked semi on Highway 14, every on-duty deputy was tied up. The dispatcher would try to roust an off-duty officer, but arrival could take an hour or more. She advised us to lock the cabin and drive to town. We agreed without argument and began throwing belongings into duffels. I stuffed socks into a gym bag, slung it over my shoulder, and stepped onto the porch first. That ache of nausea slammed into me, violent enough that my knees wobbled. I needed to urinate again. Panic seems to squeeze bladder muscles. James dropped his duffel, yanked an axe from the open tailgate. He raised it above his head and shouted a feral challenge. For 3 breaths the creature merely crouched, long arms hanging. Then it issued a scream. No wolf howl or cougar screech, but something that split pitch. Half Arctic wind, half rusted hinge amplified through a megaphone. It backpedaled so fast the motion blurred, sank below the fence line, and was gone. Everyone had heard the cry. Dad hustled Mom onto the truck bench. George locked Elliot inside their cab. We shoved keys into ignitions and gunned engines, fishtailing down the dirt road. At the crossroads, James ran the stop sign. Habit compelled me to pause. I glanced left, right, pressed the brake. That is when the creature sprinted into my rearview mirror, a gray streak hammering on all fours. Reflex took over. I floored the pedal. Tires screamed. My father bawled a question I did not register. The truck leapt past 70, 80. On gravel curves, I skidded sideways, felt steering wheel vibrate. 20 minutes became 10. We met at a tavern in town, a narrow dive with neon beer signs buzzing against wood panel walls. The bartender eyed our frightened faces, asked no questions. James phoned dispatch again with shaky hands. A deputy agreed to inspect the properties at dawn. We stayed until last call, then drove home in convoy, each driver checking mirrors far too often. Sunday, a deputy found nothing but ragged carcasses. His official report cited suspected large predator or feral dog pack. No mention of bodies pinned to branches. No mention, of course, of a gaunt gray shape towering over fence posts. James purchased new game cameras, floodlights, a motion sensor siren. Come November, we still return for the deer opener. Tradition dies hard. But dusk found us on cots behind bolted doors, rifles within reach. I forced the experience into the back warehouse of my brain until 2 months later, when a documentary looped on late-night cable, Legends of the Ojibwe and Cree. One name jolted me upright, Wendigo, the eater of men, a spirit that roams winter forests where hunger walks hand in hand with madness. Artists drew it as tall, gaunt, skin pulled like parchment, eyes black as rot. The ancient stories claim a Wendigo favors lonely ridges and beckons hunters with mutilated game. Superstition, maybe, or maybe some truths hide behind the oldest warnings. I do not claim to know what tore those animals or what watched me that night through frost-silver briars. I know only the facts my own senses delivered. The rank copper scent before dawn, the black mirror eyes, the way silence flooded an entire valley wherever it stepped. If that aligns with the old word Wendigo, so be it. If skeptics prefer unknown predator, let them argue in the safety of fluorescent offices. I will not return after dark. The cornfield, the ridge, the little deer stand island, they belong to something else now. I never pretended to be a saint while I was growing up in central Pennsylvania. Teachers kept me after class. Principals phoned my parents twice a month, and the local patrol officer learned my first name before I turned 12. Fighting, vandalizing, cutting classes, small-town trouble that most kids outgrow, stuck to me the way cigarette smoke clings to old drapes. No matter how many times I promised the school counselor I would turn things around, I seemed to slide farther downhill. Even now, 27 years old, sharing a rented duplex with the woman I love, holding a steady factory job, I know the stamp from those years still sits on me. I can hear it in the way neighbors drop their voices when I walk by. I can see it in the way managers count inventory twice when I finish a shift. Some mistakes trail you forever, like a can tied behind a bumper. But a bad reputation is not the worst thing I carry. For 16 years, I have lived with something that follows me in a more literal sense. Something that first tapped on my bedroom window when I was 10 and has never entirely disappeared. If I try to explain it out loud, friends tilt their heads the way you tilt your head at a mechanical noise in the dark, and then kindly steer the subject elsewhere. My girlfriend Lena knows a little. She believes more in anxiety disorders than in supernatural punishment, so she chalks the story up to late-night panic attacks. I do not correct her. What else can I do? Knocking on my therapist's door would earn me a prescription and a file under delusional episodes. Police would laugh unless I produced a photo, and cameras never seem to work when that thing appears. So I write instead, record every detail, make a map of fear so complete that if anyone else ever suffers the same haunting, the map might point a way out. The first time it showed itself was the spring of 5th grade. I had convinced my best friend, call him Ryan, to stay the weekend. We spread sleeping bags on the living room carpet, gorged on pizza rolls, and thrashed our thumbs through 3 straight hours of Mario Kart until the TV washed gray with static. Ryan drifted first, his chin tipped back against the couch cushion, controller still in hand. I remember laughing, shaking him by the shoulder, and then surrendering to my own exhaustion, the glow of the television bleeding blue across my eyelids. Sometime after midnight, Ryan's fingers clawed my sweatshirt. "Lucas," he rasped, half whisper, half sob, "there's something at the window." I blinked at him, annoyed, shuffled to the bay window that faced our moonlit driveway, and pulled the curtain wide. Nothing met my eyes except the early glow down the road. No raccoons scurried, no older kids hid behind shrubbery waiting to shout boo. I called Ryan a baby and flopped back onto my pillow. Then a sound peeled the air behind me. Tap, tap, tap. Not knuckles, not fingernails, more like the quick, precise beak of a woodpecker testing bark. A second noise followed, worse than the first. A long, glass-grinding squeal, as though someone dragged a claw downward from the frame's top to its sill. Ryan screamed. I squeaked. Both of us froze. The house fell silent again, but the shape burned into my mind. A memory of 5 chalk-white fingers spread against cold glass, each joint too long, knuckles bulging, nails curling like yellow thorns. Before we found courage to speak, the shape vanished. Ryan pounded up the stairs, shrieking for my parents. Mom grumbled about nightmares. Dad carried a baseball bat onto the porch, swung the beam of his mag light over frost-silver shrubs, declared the yard empty, and sent us back to our sleeping bags. Ryan never spent the night again. From grade school through sophomore year, I shoved that night into the drawer labeled creepy childhood dreams. Grades slipped, fights doubled, the cops drove me home twice before I turned 16. Whatever haunted my window seemed part of another life, a shadow I outgrew. Then, junior year, reality clawed through the curtain. On my 17th birthday, Lena adopted a German Shepherd pup for me, a chunky female I named Neela. She matured fast into 60 pounds of muscle and mischief, fearless of anything on 4 legs and contemptuous of anything on 2 that tried to threaten us. Every night at 10 sharp, I leashed her for a quick circuit around the yard. Steady routine settled both my nerves and hers. One December evening, she balked at the threshold. The instant I clicked the leash to her collar, her hackles lifted. A rumble started in her chest so low I felt it rather than heard it. She braced her paws, all teeth, all growl, eyes locked on the giant oak that dominated our side lawn. I stepped onto the porch, followed her line of sight, and saw nothing, at first. Then, as moonlight sifted through leafless branches, a hand, or what looked like a hand, eased around the trunk. Not a human hand. Each finger bone-thin, stretched an extra inch, skin the color of candle wax left too long in a cellar, nails so pale they gleamed. The fingers flexed once, just a greeting, a wave. I could not swallow. Neela's snarl deepened. She bolted through the doorframe, dragging me backward by the leash until my heel caught the lip of the stairs and we tumbled inside. I slammed the door, locked the deadbolt, and spent the next 3 hours huddled under a blanket while Neela prowled each window, hackles twitching. Weeks passed. Christmas came and went. I managed to relegate the incident to the corner of my mind where the 5th grade memory slept. Monsters in the dark belong to fairy tales. Who clings to fairy tales junior year? And yet a private routine formed. Every Sunday night at exactly 10, I would stand on the porch, pretending a cigarette break, and force myself to look at the oak tree. The yard remained empty. Wind scuffed dry leaves. Relief settled until muscles unkinked. The pattern lasted through winter until late March. Sunday, 10 o'clock, leash in hand, a grin half-formed at my own paranoia, I opened the storm door and stepped onto concrete. Neela halted so fast the flex lead whiplashed. Her entire body became tension. Shoulders down, nostrils flaring, eyes wide. I followed her gaze. No pale hand this time. The entire creature crouched in full view. 7, 8 feet tall if it stood erect. Though erect did not seem its preference. Instead, it stooped on backward bent legs like a grasshopper, arms folded strangely across its ribs. Ribs, yes, every single one counted under parchment flesh. The skull, narrow, crowned by thinning patches of colorless hair. And the eyes, fully black, yet ringed by some reflective film that caught porch-light glow and bounced it back like glass marbles. My breath clenched so hard it burned. I stepped backward into the house. The door brushed the creature's outline, and only then did it unfold. An impossible fluid motion, rod straight to its full height. Before I could blink, it sprinted into darkness behind the shed. No flapping coat, no crunch of shoes. It moved so silently the oak leaves underfoot never rustled. A car alarm somewhere up the block broke the numb hush. When I looked again, the backyard lay vacant. I managed to haul Neela inside, deadbolt the door twice, and collapse against the cabinets. My phone buzzed. Lena, teasing me for running late to movie night. My parents, blessedly, were gone for the weekend, so I swallowed panic, shoved the vision under blank denial, and forced myself to drive to her house. That night, I triple-checked the locks before leaving. The following weeks rewrote my fear. If Sunday 10 o'clock once felt like a silly superstition, it now wore the certainty of a death sentence. Still, I performed the ritual. Leash Neela, open door, hope no apparition waited. Sometimes the yard remained empty. Other times, the thing watched from the tree line. It never advanced when I looked straight at it. Only when I let my guard drop, only when my mind drifted for a breath, did its position shift half a yard closer. Arms unfolding, mouth stretching larger than any hinge of cartilage allows, lips peeling back to show rows of teeth like needles. Neela always sensed it first. She shook. She growled so deep I felt her chest vibrate. And always it vanished the second street lamps flared or a neighbor's door opened. Graduation came. I barely scraped a diploma. I wrecked my father's pickup, yet escaped a DUI on a technicality. I punched a guy in a parking lot brawl and watched the district attorney waive charges only because the other kid swung first. The more trouble I spun, the more often the creature appeared. Not merely Sundays, not merely 10 o'clock sessions. It stood at my second-floor bedroom window, tapping. It crouched beneath the bleachers behind the softball diamonds while Lena and I shared stolen kisses. Friends blamed my jumpiness on pills, booze, exhaustion. I stopped arguing. One July night, the thing tested something new. Around 2 in the morning, a mournful howl drifted through half-open windows. Picture a coyote jammed into a garbage compactor while an opera singer hits a final note. The sound scraped enamel off my teeth. It rose 3 times, 4 from different corners of the block. Neela whined, pressed her belly to the hallway floor. When the howl ceased, tapping began. Measured taps on the glass, living room, kitchen, upstairs hall, as though the creature circled, asking politely to come in. I sat against the bedroom door, gripping the baseball bat Dad once used when he still dreamed of Little League champions. That night lasted years. After graduation, I took seasonal work loading pallets at the packing plant. Steel walls, sodium lights, 8 hours of honest labor, an environment where nothing spectral belonged. My first month on the job passed without incident, and I convinced myself the creature had retreated. I accepted an invitation to a coworker's Sunday barbecue, lingered till midnight, and drove home under half a moon. No dread, no nausea. I parked at the curb, stepped onto the sidewalk, and heard a twig crack. Not behind me, not beside me, above me. I looked up. It perched on the telephone pole, fingers dug into creosote wood, toes, if you could call them toes, curling over the crossbar. The mouth opened, the skin at the cheeks split as though nothing but old glue held the seams. No scream came. Instead, a long, almost playful hiss slid between crooked teeth. My bowels cramped. Only a sudden car rumbled by, headlights washing over me, snapped the trance. When the beam swung across the pole, the thing was gone. For a week after, the ritual silence resumed. Then, on a breezeless Tuesday at 3 in the morning, Neela bolted upright in her crate. Something soft clicked in the kitchen. Metal spoon knocked against sink edge. The dog whined an alarm I had never heard, too frightened even to bark. I padded barefoot, bat in hand. Moonlight spilled across tiles. The back door stood half ajar, screen bowing inward as if someone had pushed through. My hand shook too badly to dial 911, so I slammed both latches, dragged the fridge in front of the frame, and slept inside the pantry. Lights on, phone in fist, dog jammed against my hip. Neighbors found animal corpses the next morning. A barn cat, a rabbit, a fawn that must have wandered from the patch of county forest. Each lay gutted, intestines strung through chain-link fences or draped over rose hedges. Police shrugged. Coyotes, feral dogs, foxes. Happens more than you city folks think. Ask some rural Wisconsinites about odd killings, and they will mumble a single word, Wendigo, before clamming up. I had never weighed campfire legends seriously, but terror breeds research. One midnight Google binge spilled thousands of lines of lore onto my screen. Algonquin myths about cannibal spirits, stories of gaunt giants haunting winter hunting grounds, ripped torsos left as warnings. Every image looked wrong and far-fetched. And yet the similarities, pale stretched flesh, elongated limbs, black lustrous eyes, mimicry taps, coiled around my heart. The word Wendigo stuck in my throat like a fishhook. I told no one outside the screen's glow. They would diagnose mental illness, medicate, lock me in white rooms. So I lived alongside the haunting. By 23, I had moved into a duplex with Lena and Nyla, a different town, 10 miles from the first tree. The creature followed. Sundays, Wednesdays, random dawns, always the same pattern. A nauseous wave first, then tapping or scraping, then a glimpse. Sometimes across the street beside the storm drain, sometimes clinging to the warmth trap behind the restaurant dumpster, sometimes squatting on our duplex's flat roof, silhouette ugly against stars. Doors double-bolted, curtains stayed drawn. Last autumn, the pattern escalated. One Thursday night, I returned from second shift, keys in hand, scanning sidewalks. Nothing in sight. Rain misted. I reached the step. Neela barked inside. High frantic barks, not her usual hello. I fitted the key, looked up, and saw the creature reflected in the window next to my face. It stood inch close on the other side of glass, hands splayed, long nail tracing soundless circles near my ear. I screamed. Glass spider-webbed where my shoulder hit the storm door. I tumbled backward onto concrete. The reflection dissolved. Police arrived, found no footprints, chalked the cracks to drunken stumbling. That was 11 months ago. Since then, the hauntings hit random intervals, maybe twice in a fortnight, maybe silence for a month, but never fully gone. Always nausea warns me, always taps. Lena hears knocks sometimes, dismisses them as restless branches. She finds my white-knuckled grip on the bat excessive. She thinks the cameras I installed are overkill. Babe, she says, it's anxiety. Your past, the fights, the cops, that's what you see in the dark. I let her believe. God, I wish I could believe. We adopted blackout curtains. Sundays, my phone alarm warbles at 9:58 p.m. I check each window, leash Neela, gather courage, and step onto the porch. Sometimes the yard is clear. Sometimes pale eyes gleam between trash cans. Sometimes a hiss rides the wind. I have learned not to look longer than one heartbeat. Staring invites progress. Turning my gaze away freezes it. The creature obeys no physics I understand, but it obeys attention. Where sight rests, it halts. Where sight falters, it moves. Friends invite me camping in the old ridges near Richland Center. I invent overnight shifts. Co-workers tease me about never joining bar crawls after work. I practice smiles, nods, half-truths. The haunting, whatever its origin, is mine alone. A punishment? Maybe. Karma for bruised faces, broken curfews, pain I caused without remorse? I cannot prove otherwise. Whenever nausea coils in my gut at night, I sense a cosmic accounting. The ledger opened, the deficit clawing back. Last Sunday came quiet until 11:42 p.m. That hour found me on the living room couch, laptop open to an essay on dental inflections in Wendigo folklore. The nausea erupted so violently I pitched forward. Tap, tap, tap from the sliding glass door. Neela rose hackles high, her growl started, choked, died. The first time I have ever heard her go silent in menace. I lifted my eyes, the creature's face pressed against the pane, breath fogging and oval, its maw wider than before, tongue black. It moved its head left, right, an inch each way, studying me with something colder than hatred. Ownership, maybe. I stared too long. Its hand twitched, a claw tip scratched downward. The glass did not break, but I heard molecules cry. I clenched my eyes shut, counted heartbeats. When I looked up, the fog patch remained. The creature did not. Lena found me at dawn, seated against the refrigerator, bat between knees, dog whimpering under my arm. She wanted urgent care. I asked for a weekend in Denver with her sister, anywhere bright, crowded, distant from trees. She booked tickets. We leave Friday. I do not know if a plane can outrun what walks at midnight. I only know that nausea sits in my gut right now as I type, building slow. If someone reads this who has seen the same parchment skin, the same black eyes polished like obsidian, write your story. Map the behavior. Because whatever the legends call it, Wendigo, shadow, karma, it is real. It honors no locks, no county lines, no prayers. It feeds on your guilt the way rust eats steel, patient and unstoppable, until even a gentle tap on the window becomes thunder. I had spent most of that summer riding an odd burst of optimism. College had started well, my part-time courier job paid better than I expected, and my parents had finally quit lecturing me about doing something outdoors instead of gaming. So when my friend Macias floated the idea of heading up to Mount Baldy National Forest the first weekend after Labor Day, I shrugged and said sure. I had hiked Baldy's lower switchbacks a few times, but none of us had camped more than a mile from designated grounds. Every established site was closed for trail repairs that month, so we decided, half daring each other, half wanting to brag later, to hump our gear 2 miles off the South Fork Trail and stake our tents in genuinely empty timber. The lineup looked like this: Macias, the unofficial ringleader; Anthony, the cautious one who insisted on bringing his 40 cal Glock because, look man, bears happen, just in case; Morales, who cracked jokes at his own expense and swore any sound in the dark would turn him into Usain Bolt; Mitchell, quiet, always scribbling landscapes in his notebook; and me, who tried to keep everyone on schedule. Macias, Mitchell, and I had grown up in the same neighborhood. Morales and Anthony were cousins. All 5 of us were 20, give or take a few months, old enough to vote, young enough to feel bulletproof, equally inexperienced in genuine backcountry camping. We left the city before dawn on a cool Friday, all 5 packs wedged in the bed of Anthony's Tacoma, under a tarp that snapped like a flag whenever the truck crested a ridge. The mountain road twisted from sun-baked chaparral into high ponderosa and red fir. Around 9:30, we bumped across the vacant trailhead parking lot, shouldered our packs, and eased past a Forest Service barricade that read "Closed, trail rehab in progress." Rehab on a trail means broken switchbacks, not minefields, Macias said when I hesitated. We'll take it slow. The first half mile clawed up switchbacks so steep my calves cramped. The next mile followed a shallow ridge where the sun fought gaps in the pine canopy. By the time we dropped into a saddle thick with ferns, conversation had died under the weight of sweat and altitude. I was leading the file when I felt it first. A hush sliding over the trail as if someone had stuffed cotton in my ears. No jays squabbling overhead, no crickets filing their wings, not even the papery flutter of aspen leaves. It struck me so suddenly I stopped short, wondering whether my sinuses had popped shut. Morales nearly walked into my pack. "Yo, why we stoppin'?" he griped. "Listen," I said. Everyone tilted their heads. Nothing. No insect drone, no chipmunk chirp. Even our breathing sounded muffled. It lasted maybe 20 seconds. Then we stepped across a trickle of water, just a foot-wide braid silvering the mud, and natural sound crashed back. Thrushes piping, pine needles ticking as wind gusted, a distant woodpecker hammering. The shift unnerved me, but Anthony said mountain forests develop weird acoustic pockets. Mitchell mentioned temperature inversions. Morales called us nerds. We walked on. We found a decent flat 20 yards above a creek bend. Pines blocked most of the sun. Granite outcrops framed a view of Baldy's northern shoulder, and a shallow shelf of sandy soil offered space for 2 tents and a fire pit. We dropped our packs, collected deadfall, dug a cathol latrine 50 paces downhill, and built a small pyramid of kindling. By twilight, Macias had coaxed a respectable fire. Morales unzipped a vacuum-sealed bag of carne asada and laid strips across Anthony's folding grate, while Mitchell sketched the campsite in pencil. We ate, passed a flask of cheap bourbon, murmured about how crisp early autumn air felt at 7,000 feet. When the light dropped from pale gold to bruised purple, Anthony produced a plastic jar. "Found an indica cartridge in my brother's toolbox," he announced. "Thank him for his service." He twirled the vape pen like a magician's wand and offered it around. Macias and I took hits, so did Morales, so did Mitchell, surprising us all. He inhaled, exhaled a lazy scroll of smoke, and said not a word. Anthony, designated gun tote and half-serious safety officer, passed. Soon laughter spilled into the treetops. Everything funny, every crack of wood in the fire an inside joke. Stars burned ridiculously bright over the granite spine of Baldy. Sometime after 10, Morales pushed himself up, slurred, "Y'all keep talking, I gotta drop a damn bomb." He unclipped a small LED lantern from a branch, shuffled toward the latrine with his roll of TP, humming off-key. Anthony pointed at his cousin's swaying silhouette and shook his head. "Drunk and high on a dark mountain? Bro's gonna wipe with poison ivy." 10 minutes passed, maybe 15, the fire snicked down to coals. Mitchell scribbled in the margin of his pad. Macias tried to remember which month Perseid meteors peaked. Anthony used a stick to push glowing char into a neat mound. A rustle tipped our heads toward the tree line. Out stepped Morales, naked from waist to knees, pants bunched around one ankle like a snared animal. His face looked wrong. Eyes too wide, mouth too thin. He half whispered, half wheezed. "We need to get the fuck out of here." Macias laughed. "What happened? Squirrel bite your ass?" Morales' voice cracked. "I was squatting, okay? Heard somebody walking. Thought it was you jerks. Then I turned my light around." He swallowed. "It wasn't you. It was... Dude, we need to leave." Anthony had already thumbed the safety off the Glock. "Slow down. What did you see?" Morales yanked his jeans over damp boxers, hopping on one foot. Tall, skinny, hid behind a tree but poked its head out. Eyes wrong, skin wrong, 2 legs. Walking funny. "Deer," Anthony said. "Elk, maybe." Morales tried to laugh, failed. "What kind of deer stands up and stares while you're taking a shit?" Silence. Flame-licked pine pitch with a quiet hiss. The rising moon cleared a ridge, painted long shadows across the hollow. No one moved. Finally I said, "Look, we're buzzed, tired, spooked. Let's rack out. If Morales saw something, we'll check tracks at first light." Morales scowled but ducked into the 2-man tent he shared with Mitchell. Macias doused the fire with creek water. Sparks fizzed. Anthony set the Glock inside his boot by the vestibule flap, zipped himself up, and wished us luck. I crawled into the second tent and burrowed into my sleeping bag, fully clothed, vape room giggles gone flat in memory. My watch read 12:17 a.m. I lay listening to wind slip through needles, the forest's heartbeat, constant, unchanged, until I slept. Some unknown hour later, pressure in my bladder hauled me awake. The tent flap drooped in silhouette. Anthony's snore, a freight train rasp, saw Ed at the dark. I groped for my boots, muttered, "Gotta pee," and felt Anthony shift but not wake. The zipper rasped open. Chill air pricked my skin. I ducked out, boots unlaced, pea coat thrown over thermal top. Campfire aroma clung to everything. Halfway to the latrine, I realized the forest had fallen silent again. No wind, no leaves ticking, not even the distant creek murmuring over rocks. My urine pattered too loud against soil. Breath clouded white. I buttoned my fly and whispered, "Anthony," though he was 30 yards away. A shadow split from the nearest pine. It stood 7, maybe 8 feet, arms dangling near knees, torso too narrow for that height. The moon caught pale skin, neither furred nor feathered, pulled tight across protruding ribs. Its legs bent oddly forward at the knee, like a dog standing upright. In a second that stretched forever, I saw its eyes, reflective green-white orbs lacking iris or pupil, as if fog lights smoldered inside its skull. Anthony's boot soles crunched behind me, a metallic click, the slide racking around, and he leveled the Glock. "Whoever you are, back off." No response. I found my voice long enough to whisper, "Don't." Anthony fired a warning shot 2 feet over the figure's head. The gun's bark still bounced across the basin when everything changed. No forest echo, no whitetail crashing. Instead, a sound burst from the figure, part television static, part dying goat, part wolf howl, overlaid so sharply my sinuses buzzed. Muscle memory propelled me backward. Anthony and I sprinted for camp, shoelaces whipping our ankles. In the tents, Morales and Mitchell scrambled awake, half convinced we were punking them, until that static goat scream rose again, closer. "Pack up, move out," Anthony ordered. We clawed sleeping bags into stuffed sacks, jammed stoves half full of water into side pockets. Nobody bothered with tent poles. We stripped rain flies, ripped stakes free, balled fabric as quickly as fingers allowed. Every 20 seconds the scream tore the night. Never the same distance twice, sometimes above us on the slope, sometimes below, as if the thing could step sideways through space. Headlamps jerked wild, throwing hard shadows. Morales did the insane hero thing. He snatched Anthony's penlight, marched 5 paces toward the trees, and shouted, "Leave us the fuck alone, or I'll mess you up." The trunks on the far edge trembled. Not wind. Something physical rippled through them. Branches clacked, pine cones rattled to earth. Then the creature floated. No other verb fits, floated out from behind a cedar, arms long enough that claws brushed duff. Its skin looked whiter under LEDs, paper yellow under moon. Chest rose, fell in shallow patches. It opened its mouth wider than a snake and in a splintered parody of English rasped, "I've been waiting, Morales. Come here, give me a hand." I swear the voice carried the texture of rust, fine and sandy. Did it know Morales's name? Did we imagine that syllable? Nobody waited to debate phonetics. Anthony fired again. 2 quick shots, one into the dirt between the figure's feet, one into a rotten log when recoil jerked his wrist. The creature recoiled but did not retreat. Instead, it sank back on haunches and cocked its head left, right, studying us the way an entomologist studies wasps in a jar. That paralysis broke when Morales screamed, "Go!" We heaved packs onto shoulders, abandoned tents where they collapsed. The half-mapped ridgeline trail turned into an obstacle course by headlamp. Rocks rolled under soles, roots snagged laces, bushwhacked limbs whipped throats. About 100 yards along the switchback, Mitchell tripped and tumbled. Macias dragged him up, shoved his notebook back into his vest, and herded him forward. The scream followed, fading, always at our backs. I heard no pursuit through brush, no branch snap, no gravel slide. But the mental picture of that pale figure striding silent behind us shoved adrenaline through veins faster than any real noise could. We made the parking lot in under 50 minutes. I fumbled keys from Anthony's pocket while he kept the pistol trained. Headlamps leaked yellow through windows as we heaped gear into the bed, boots slipping on asphalt. Morales doubled over the tailgate and vomited dry bourbon and half-digested carne asada. Anthony peeled out in reverse, fishtailed gravel onto scrub, and gunned downhill. Tents flapped loose in the bed, half out the side. We let them fly. 5 miles passed without anyone speaking beyond Anthony's muttered roadmap curses. Or maybe we did speak. Memory fractures. Halfway back to town, cell service bars slid onto screens. Anthony called his father, retired sheriff's deputy, to ask whether firing a warning shot on national forest land would get us arrested. His father said no deputies patrolled that sector after dark. "What the hell were you shooting at?" he asked. Anthony said a bear. His dad grunted, told him next time aim into a hillside instead of sky, and hung up. We did not stop until a 24-hour diner's fluorescent sign poured across the hood. Inside, surrounded by clatter of dishes and cinnamon-sweet coffee, we tried aligning versions. Macias thought the creature's legs bent forward like a digitigrade animal. Mitchell swore they bent backward. Too many joints. Morales insisted the voice had used his real name. First, middle, last, though none of us had heard more than that raspy, broken sentence. Anthony studied his phone, replaying cell camera footage he tried to record during the flight. The screen showed nothing but streaks of light. At dawn, we drove home separately. I showered 40 minutes under heat full blast, but the stink of pine duff, sweat, and rusted breath lingered on my skin. Nobody reported the incident. Rangers would label it mountain lion curiosity or prankster paranoia. Police would cite us for trespassing on closed trail. For a week, Morales texted daily variations on, "I'm done with camping, bro." By October, we half-joked about Mount Baldy's devil, yet each time the joke circled back, conversation stalled. Mitchell burned his sketches. Anthony booked pistol safety refresher. Macias hiked alone every weekend to prove nothing could scare him, but he avoided Baldy. I tried dissecting what we saw. Google rabbit holes offered folklore. Wendigo from Algonquin graves, skinwalkers from Navajo mesas, pale walkers, goatmen, rakes, the gutted taxonomy of modern creepypasta. None fit exactly. The voice, the unnatural silence bubble, the direct use of a name. Those details felt personal, predatory, something ancient playing with its food. The more time passed, the clearer the memory sharpened. The way moonlight wet the bones under its skin, the way claws furrowed earth when it leaned into view, the way the forest seemed to hold its breath each time it vocalized. 6 months later, a ranger discovered a collapsed makeshift camp 2 miles off South Fork, a shredded 2-man tent, rusting stove, empty casings stamped Federal 40, decomposing scraps of foil and tortilla. No sign of hikers, no report filed. Trail crews reopened the loop that spring. New warning placards greeted day hikers. Bear country, carry out all food scraps. Nobody mentioned screams, splitting pines at 2 in the morning, or a voice like a dying transmission begging Morales for a hand. I sometimes dream of that midnight hush. It begins normal, crickets, wings, leaves, then every frequency drops out at once, a vacuum tight as the inside of a jar. I turn, look down an endless latrine path, see moonlight painting bark, and know something waits behind the trunk, breath so shallow even silence can't catch it. I wake tasting pine pitch and copper. Complaints of PTSD bring shrugs from campus counselors. Sound like panic episodes. Breathing techniques will help. Maybe they will, but sometimes breath is the last thing I trust. If you hike Mount Baldy, know the ridge beyond Creek Bend turns wrong between heartbeats. Know the air there's a door. Know something on the other side hears your jokes, learns your name, and waits. We left those woods without looking back. Someone else might not run fast enough. If you hear the forest hush or feel your guts twist like acid at moonrise, do not shout warnings, do not fire bravado into the air. Shoulder your pack, keep your eyes low, and get out before the voice finds you. I was 15 years old when the whole thing happened, and even though more than a year has passed, I can still feel every detail sitting fresh in my mind. The way cold lake water sits in the creases of your skin after you climb out. My family decided on one last weekend away before school routines swallowed us. And because the weather was still good, warm days, cool evenings, not yet cold enough for frost, my parents booked 2 adjoining sites at Miquelon Lake Provincial Park, a modest campground in central Alberta. Miquelon is not the blue postcard lake you find on travel brochures. Most locals call it a shrinking puddle of greenish soup, but it still offers gentle hills, pockets of spruce and aspen, and most important for people like my mother, flush toilets and a little store that sells ice cream bars. We go every summer. I know the loop roads, I know how the frogs sound at night, and I know which staff members will wink and give you an extra scoop of fries if you smile politely. Because family camping is more fun when you have someone your own age to laugh with, I invited my closest friend, Zach. He and I are both 15, the kinds of kids who get decent grades but prefer skateboarding, video games, and walking wooded trails to anything remotely sporty. Zach is skinnier than I am. He always jokes that if a strong wind hit him sideways, it would carry him to Saskatchewan. But he is funny, he has quick hands for setting up tents, and he never complains when mosquitoes find us first. Our parents parked the 2 minivans side by side. We unfolded lawn chairs, we helped pitch the big dome tent that Zach and I would share, and we grilled the usual campsite burgers. Everything felt normal, as ordinary as an August sunset can feel when the air holds that golden color. A little after 7:30, we finished washing dishes, and Zach suggested we stretch our legs along one of the forest trails. Evening walks are a habit for us. He likes looking for birds he can identify with a cheap field guide, and I like trying to photograph the way orange light threads between trunks. Our parents approved. Stay on main paths, Mom said. Be back before dark. Carry water. We grabbed our little day pack. 1 bottle, 1 chocolate bar, my phone, Zach's pocket knife, and followed the gravel road toward the park center. Near the visitor building, there is a cluster of signed trails, most flat, most easy enough for families pushing strollers. We picked the meadow trail first, which loops around an open field dotted with bluebird boxes, and then turned onto Aspen Run. The sun slid lower, insects blinked in shafts of last light, and we eased into that quiet afternoon mood where you don't need to fill silence with talk. The regular route forks in 3 places, but after you've walked them a few summers in a row, none feels mysterious. That is why the overgrown side path caught our attention. Both of us noticed at the same time, a narrow track running left through knee-high grass. half hidden by young saplings, clearly older than the rest because the gravel base still showed if you kicked away moss. No signpost, no closed marker, nothing. Just a forgotten lane disappearing between trees. Exploring is irresistible when you are 15 and bored of familiar corners. I took one quick photo of the entrance so we could show Zach's dad later. His father is a geography teacher and loves old roads, and we stepped in. At first, the lost trail looked harmless, a ribbon of damp soil with boot prints faded by time. After maybe 5 minutes, shrubs grew thicker, hillocks of willow roots crossed the tread, and low-hanging branches brushed our shoulders. We were not worried. The campground was half a kilometer behind us. The sun was still above the horizon. Our phone batteries were close to full. We joked that it felt like we were starring in a low-budget adventure movie. 15 or 20 minutes along, the path veered into a cluster of poplar saplings so tight we had to turn sideways. That was when Zach heard rustling off to our right, an unmistakable sound of something sizable pushing through undergrowth. He stopped, cocked his head, said, "Probably a beaver, eh?" Beaver dams speckle Miquelon's marshier corners, and we had seen one the year before while riding bikes. My instinct said it was bigger. I told him to hold on. I squinted through shadowy branches, and my stomach folded itself inside when I spotted a face. Not a cartoon face. Not some silhouette you can talk yourself out of. This was a cougar, a mountain lion, a fully grown cat crouching behind a chokecherry bush 15 meters away. Even in dim light, its eyes shone yellow, its square muzzle and black whisker pads clear as the nose on my own face. Yet the leaves around that head stayed oddly still, while we could still hear rustling somewhere behind, so for half a second, I wondered if I was seeing two different animals. Shock does funny things to time. I whispered Zach's name, pointed, felt his entire posture change as he realized what I was showing him. He looked small suddenly. Cougars are shy but not mythical. Over the past decade, Alberta's protected areas have given them more habitat, and local newspapers report sightings each year. Rangers always advise the same steps: stay calm, keep eye contact, back away slowly. I told Zach exactly that: keep facing it, move back. He nodded, though the whites of his eyes showed how badly he wanted to sprint. Together we slid backward, heels bumping roots, arms stiff at our sides. The cougar's face stayed fixed, unblinking. I listened for footfalls behind it, wondering about the rustle, picturing kittens maybe hidden deeper in brush. The thought chilled me because every parent animal in every wildlife documentary goes ferocious when young are threatened. We retreated a good 40 meters before we dared breathe easier. Birds flicked through treetops, mosquitoes found us, distant laughter drifted from the campground. We figured the cat would melt away once we left its critical space. We dared to turn and walk normally, not fast, just steady. What we did not know, because fear narrows attention, was that the trail ahead curved tightly left after a small rise. We walked over that bump, another 30 seconds, maybe less, and there the cougar stood, smack center of path, tail low, head level, staring. Either it ran a silent loop through timber to cut us off, or more likely, there were two cats, and the still face we saw first belonged to a youngster while the adult flanked us. Whichever scenario, the meaning felt the same. The animal wanted us gone, or, worse, wanted to test whether we were prey. Fight or flight splits instantly. Zach chose flight. I do not blame him, not 1%. Panic robs rational thought. He bolted past me, sneakers scraping, backpack slamming his ribs, hands out like a football player stiff-arming air. The cougar reacted the way a house cat reacts when a ribbon jerks, muscles coiled and launched. I had trained in Taekwondo years earlier, not enough to make me a hero, but enough to program a reflex: intercept. I stepped forward, yanked the K-bar from its sheath on my belt, and jabbed in one desperate motion. Steel hit fur and slid until a rib halted the blade. The cat screamed, a raspy, deep cough, more terrifying than Hollywood roars, but momentum toppled us both. My knife hand lost grip as claws shredded the back of my knuckles. We slammed earth. Its shoulder drove into my chest. Its mouth found my left forearm because I jammed that arm between teeth and throat. Exactly what self-defense videos preach, but easier watched than done. Pain is a clean white flash that becomes heat, then numbness, then waves of nausea. I felt each stage while dirt and dead leaves filled my nostrils. The cat raked my shoulders. I heard fabric rip. I smelled its musk, a wild scent like wet dog and copper. My mind threw one clear command: deeper. I forced the bitten arm deeper, past canines, until my knuckles touched something fleshy at the back of its throat. Gag reflex is universal. Even apex predators hate it. The cougar released, shaking head side to side, coughing, eyes flaring. Its claws still pinned my jacket, but its mouth opened enough that I yanked free, rolled, searched for my fallen knife. I had no plan beyond keep space until it leaps again and hope for a miracle. The miracle arrived louder than thunder, a rifle crack bang that froze every molecule. For a heartbeat, I thought park rangers used blanks to scare wildlife, then realized blanks do not tear through muscle. The cougar staggered sideways, foreleg collapsing under weight, a red stain spreading across tawny ribs. It managed a broken growl, tried to stand, failed, then twitched once and went still. Behind it, framed by tree trunks, came a uniformed man I recognized vaguely from past summers, a Browning rifle still shouldered, Zach trailing behind him, panting so hard his words arrived in fragments. "He's here. Help, my friend. Cat attack, please." The ranger, hurried but professional, knelt beside me, pressed gauze pads from his first aid pouch over torn forearm, told me to breathe steady. Shock threatened to fold me. Zach knelt too, tears mixing with sweat, repeating, "I'm sorry, man. I ran, I'm sorry." I tried to answer but only groaned. The ranger said other hikers had reported a cougar earlier that afternoon near the main loops, usual passive sighting, and he had been patrolling nearby when Zach barreled out screaming. Lucky timing, he called it, although luck felt like an insult to reality. 2 minutes slower, and the cat might have torn my neck open. He radioed headquarters, asked dispatch to call an ambulance to meet us at the visitor lot. Then he and Zach half carried me down the overgrown path. One arm over each shoulder, my blood dripping through gauze. The dead cougar left for natural cycles or later study, I did not know. The half-hour walk back blurred. I remembered toppled logs, rangers' boots slick with mud, Zach talking non-stop as if words could glue time together. Every few minutes, the ranger checked my pupils and asked whether I felt dizzy. I lied and said no, because dignity matters when you are 15. At the trailhead, he loaded me into the back seat of his pickup. Zach climbed beside me, and we bumped along gravel until asphalt of the park road smoothed the ride. My heartbeat felt like a hammer in my teeth by the time paramedics slid me onto a gurney. Emergency staff cleaned wounds, injected antibiotics, stitched 2 parallel gashes along my shoulder, inserted 12 sutures into shredded forearm muscle. One doctor explained that cougar mouths carry bacteria capable of nasty infection. We would watch the arm next 48 hours. My parents reached the hospital within an hour, cheeks ash pale, gratitude and fear mixing in their voices as they thanked ranger and surgeons. I drifted between bursts of pain and morphine soft edges. Zach stood awkwardly behind Dad, eyes swollen red. I managed to smile. "Thanks for finding help," I told him. "You saved my life as much as the ranger did." He shook his head, said something about cowardice, but I squeezed his wrist and meant it. 5 days later, I left hospital with my left arm braced in a semi-cast to limit motion while tissue knitted. Scars cross my skin like railway tracks. They will stay forever. I cannot perform pull-ups without fire flaring through tendons. Yet doctors agreed that given close call, my recovery counted as lucky beyond measure. Lucky, yes, but changed. Nightmares visited for months. A cougar's eyes in dark hallways, claws scraping lockers, blood blooming on classroom floors. Park staff said the animal was an adult female, roughly 60 kilograms, thin from poor hunting that season. They found a single kit hidden in a hollow log near the overgrown path. Wildlife officers deemed my wound a defensive attack. They relocated the orphaned kitten to a rehabilitation center. I read that in a local news article and wondered whether that life would have future territory far from humans. Zach and I remain friends. We still hike, though we stick to signed routes, bear spray clipped to belt loops, and we talk openly about fear, because fear ignored becomes denial. Some classmates call me Cougar Boy. Half teasing, half respect. I do not mind. Experience can brand a person. Sometimes the brand is simply survival. When summer returned this year, my family reserved a different campground. Miquelon's drying lake still shimmers under sunsets, but bush memories echo more than soundtrack frogs for me now. Still, sometimes I picture the forgotten trail, how dusk filtered through aspen, how silent air felt before everything changed, and I remind myself of two truths. Wild places remain wild whether humans label them parks, and courage is not lack of fear but moving inside fear when no other option remains. The lesson matters because I am still young, because other trails wait, because life itself prowls like a cat, sometimes unseen, sometimes too close. I carry scars, I carry a sharper respect for those unseen watchers in woods, and I carry a promise I made silently while lying on hospital sheets. The next time rustling bushes whisper turn back, I will turn back. I owe that wisdom to the cougar, to the ranger, to Zach, to the fragile pulse that keeps telling me each day is undeservedly precious. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. We left the pavement just before sunset, tires crunching over the last strip of broken shell that passed for a service road. I was behind the wheel, feeling 10 feet tall, because that day my learner's permit was still crisp in my wallet, and James, my closest friend since grade school, had trusted me with the drive. We coasted to a stop near a thicket of willow and cypress, killed the engine and let the silence gather. The nearest highway was miles away, and in that damp summer heat, the bayou smelled of river mud, sweet rot, and mimosa blossoms crushed under our boots. From here, a footpath wound 3 good miles through canebrakes and knee-high swamp grass toward a slight rise of ground that old parish survey maps still list as Gilroy's Island. No one has farmed or logged that patch in 3, maybe 4 decades. We hiked in as dusk bled across the treetops, packs heavy with the usual gear. Canvas tent, a skillet blackened from past trips, 2 army surplus bedrolls, cheap mosquito netting, and 1 tool meant for more than rabbits or catfish, an old semi-automatic AK pattern rifle. James's older cousin had cleaned and loaned us. Around here you sometimes run into feral hogs big as oil drums, and more than one story floats through bait shops about poachers finding a gator before it finds them. I'm not reckless about guns, but I believed hard in being prepared. I am no outdoors athlete. My driver's license says 5'9", and the doctor's scale says 238 pounds. Solid enough to move a couch, sturdy enough to walk all day if the temperature stays friendly, but never the guy who sprints up bleachers for fun. Even so, by the time we saw the clearing, we felt good, alive with that buzz you get when you drop cell phone coverage and every bird call suddenly matters. Gilroy's Island is little more than a hump of dry ground, ringed by a horseshoe of blackwater sloughs. Hardwood and palmetto crowd the edges, but a hand-sized gap opens westward toward the setting sun, and that is exactly where we rolled out the tent. Firewood lay everywhere, water oak limbs bleached by seasons, hickory sticks hard as iron, so we had a fire licking high in 20 minutes. Darkness settled the way it does only in deep south backcountry, thick, moonless, full of unseen wings and creaks. At 12:30 a.m., we leaned back on an old cedar log, both of us sweaty, smoke-scented, and cheerful. We poked at embers, laughed about nothing, let night noises wash over us. 10 feet away, crooked over a small depression, stood a tree maybe 12 feet tall. That tree mattered only because of what happened next. James had just finished a joke, something about my clumsy gear packing, when we both heard a faint rustle near that trunk. Leaves whispered once, enough to snag attention. We assumed a rabbit or armadillo, the sort of rustle you ignore after a day in the woods. Then, in the firelight's flicker, I saw 2 eyes, electric, unnatural eyes, staring from well above my head. They were not yellow the way a raccoon's eyes reflect. They were not red pinpoints some folks call panther lights. They glowed icy blue, bright as welding sparks, and they hovered roughly 7 feet up the bowl, half hidden behind Spanish moss. I felt heat drain from my face. James froze, words trapped halfway to his tongue. We both waited for the shapes to resolve into something ordinary, a possum perched on a snag or glass shards catching flame glow. But the eyes blinked, and when they opened again, a low growl rolled out, not loud but deep enough to vibrate the cedar log under us. The tone wasn't animal in any bayou sense. It reminded me of speakers rumbling in the trunk of a car straining to hold bass. Demonic is the word people like to tell afterward, and it fits because the sound lacked any quick natural rise or fall. It was a warning hummed from a throat that did not need to breathe. I reached behind me for the rifle. My fingers shook as I wrapped the sling over my wrist, thumbed safety to fire, and racked around. Steel snapped. Sparks popped from the fire. Those blue eyes didn't flinch. With every bit of calm I could scrape together, I lined the sights on the darkness beneath the glow and squeezed once. Muzzle blast snapped like dried pine exploding in flames, and bark splintered from the tree. Whatever stood there should have jerked or ducked. The creature did neither. Eyes blinked, reopened, fixed on us with patience almost human. For 2 hours, those eyes owned the clearing. James and I sat shoulder to shoulder, fire stoked tall enough to roast paint, the rifle resting across my knees, but nothing approached or withdrew. Sometimes branches shook somewhere beyond our circle, sometimes faint exhalations drifted, wet, meaty, a smell closer to predator than hog. But the eyes stayed fixed on that trunk until, without warning, they wheeled away and vanished. The departure wasn't skittish, it was deliberate. Footfalls padded across leaf litter, then a howl tore through the canopy. Sharp, guttural, rising in pitch until it ended in a rasp that scraped bone. My heartbeat hammered loud in my ears. James's jaw trembled. Neither of us slept before dawn. We fed logs to the fire until orange daylight bled gray from the sky. Rain clouds rolled over the parish by mid-morning. Doppler radio crackled from James's truck back on the service road. Flash flood advisory, standing water across highways. His pickup rode low, better suited to suburb curbs than washouts. So he argued we should wait one more night, hope roads cleared. I wanted distance but conceded. Slogging 40 miles of back roads with water up to wheel hubs sounded worse than another day's wait. We tried to keep busy. Foraged fallen branches for makeshift snares, practiced tying fishermen knots, anything to pretend last night hadn't happened. Late afternoon, we left camp to scout farther along the island's spine, maybe track down squirrels for gumbo. When we returned near dusk, the clearing looked at first glance unchanged, until we saw the blood. It painted the grass in blackened streaks, still wet near the center. Something heavy had been dragged almost to the fire pit. There, sprawled like a sacrifice, lay a wild boar, easily 300 pounds, throat opened, torso split from sternum to tail. Organs were missing. Rib cartilage gaped like fried oyster shells. Worst was the head. The creature, or someone, had taken enormous care to set the boar's severed skull on the exact cedar log where I'd rested the rifle hours earlier. Empty eye sockets faced our tent flap like a dare. James vomited into ferns. My hands trembled too badly to cover my mouth. Flies already buzzed inside the cavity, but no scavenger had yet chewed the carcass. Fresh. We, two amateurs with one rifle, were being told precisely how helpless we were. No discussion followed. We packed in silence, shoving bedrolls half-folded, forgetting gear stakes, leaving utensils in ashes. Rain misted through canopy and slicked blue grout across the boar's hide. I slung the AK and kept scanning shadows while James heaved bundles onto his back. Dusk bled fast into real night. By the time we crossed the slow bridge, lightning glimmered far off, but thunder felt muffled behind moss-draped giants. Every branch looked like arms. Every cicada buzz felt like breath behind my ear. The 3-mile hike out took half that time. Adrenaline does that, shortens miles, trims weight, edits memory. We reached the truck soaked, heart still galloping, and when the ignition caught, I wanted to cry from relief. Headlights cut white tunnels through steam rising off rutted clay, and the bayou behind us swallowed our campsite. Our fire ring, the gift left in warning. Long after midnight, James dropped me at my parents' driveway. Neither of us said much more than, "Later, man." I stepped inside, peeled wet clothes, showered twice. In the mirror, I looked older. Acceptance, maybe, that some corners of the map hold stories locals shrug off as tales, but which breathe all the same. I still hear that growl sometimes when wind hums under the eaves, and always I picture the eyes, electric blue in moonless dark, steady, unafraid, waiting at the edge of blaze light to measure which of us belongs and which of us wanders too deep. So if you go camping off familiar trails, bring fire, bring steel if laws allow, and bring the humility to leave the instant something in the woods tells you enough. Stories, after all, are not written only to entertain. Sometimes they are survival guides disguised as warnings, and ignoring a warning can cost more than any adventure is worth. I was 6 years old, nearly 7, the kind of age when each single day seems to stretch forever and every small tradition feels enormous. Winter already lay thick on our little village. We lived far from any city, tucked in a long, shallow valley that held only a scatter of houses, 2 gravel lanes, a church, and a tiny one-room primary school. In summer you could hear crickets zinging in the grass between yards, and in winter the wind brought the scent of pine smoke from half a mile away. A single snowy field separated our nearest neighbor's porch from our own, and at night there were no street lamps, no glowing store signs, nothing but moonlight on the drifts and the one porch light my father kept turned on out of habit. The isolation never frightened me in daylight because the village was all I had ever known, a place full of familiar faces and safe rhythms. At night, however, darkness crushed close around the windows, and shadows lurking between barns and tree trunks could feel wider than oceans. The last evening of November arrived with deeper cold than usual, a biting wind that rattled the screen door when we stepped outside. I remember that exact day because I had spent the previous afternoon coloring every block of the monthly calendar. Buses on the school days, little gift boxes for Christmas. Flipping from November to December meant I could begin my countdown, one square at a time, until presents appeared beneath the tree. The page turn was my favorite moment of the season, that first official permission to dream about cinnamon cookies and snowmen in the yard. I held the calendar that morning and felt a strange flutter of anticipation. Nothing in my short life warned me it would become a date I could never forget, for reasons I still wish my mind could erase. Our village had no grocery store, no pharmacy, no place to buy practical things like toilet paper or soup cans. Most families drove to the nearest market 30 minutes away, across 2 ridges and over a bridge that spanned a half-frozen creek. My parents did the same countless Saturdays. We owned a faded blue Ford van, nearly as old as my brother, that coughed to life on cold mornings but never failed to pull us back up the hill. That particular afternoon, the sky threatened flurries, so Mother wanted to finish errands before dark. She bundled me in a red wool coat, the one with a broken zipper that forced her to fasten the bottom with safety pins, then wrapped my neck in a scarf scratchier than any I wear now. She took the driver's seat because she always drove on supply trips, claiming Dad wasted fuel with his heavy foot. My older brother rode shotgun and operated the radio dial. Father, after stacking one last armload of firewood beside the porch, squeezed beside me on the second bench seat. We rumbled down our steep, icy driveway around 3 o'clock, tires spitting gravel, clouds of breath fogging the windows. The town was decorated for Christmas already. Strands of bulbs draped between light poles, cotton batting around store displays. Details that thrilled me because I still measured happiness in colored lights. We bought flour, sugar, oranges, packages of macaroni, shampoo, dog food, a few boxes of ornaments Mother had admired earlier that month. Dad joked that the tinseled reindeer near the cash register nodded at him like an old friend and asked permission to jump in the cart. Mother told him to quit before the cashier assumed we were strange, which made me giggle and nearly drop the jar of cocoa I was carrying to the conveyor belt. Ordinary motions, all of it. When we finished loading sacks into the van, the sky had turned a pale, pearly gray, and the wind scraped across the asphalt parking lot with a hiss. We set off toward home, headlights slicing through dusk. Our driveway feels much longer in memory than State Plat's record. A curving path climbing between leafless maple trunks, a final steep stretch opening to the yard and house front. Mother always parked close to the door on winter nights, so groceries traveled fewer feet across frozen ground. She switched the engine off but left headlights burning, 2 bright cones fanning across the siding and the small side garden where wind-blown weeds stood stiff beneath snow crust. Dad and my brother slid open the side door and began ferrying bags. I jumped onto the packed snow, boots crunching like sugar underfoot, and that is where the evening veered away from every normal Saturday we had ever lived. Children invent games out of boredom. One of mine involved frozen puddles. Winter seeped water from hill crevices, pooling across the driveway in shallow indentations. When night temperatures dropped, the sheets iced smooth but often trapped little pockets of air beneath. Step on the thin lid just right, and it produced a crisp crack. Pop, pop. Like miniature thunderclaps for a 6-year-old orchestra. I adored that sound. While adults hauled groceries, I hunted pockets and stomped, listening to satisfyingly sharp fractures. Nobody scolded me because my mischief seemed harmless. The wind sang in the spruce, the van's high beams glared white, and I splintered puddle after puddle until, without warning, I understood something unseen watched me. It was not a noise that alerted me, not the scuff of boots or the snap of twigs, but a wave of dread that froze breath in my chest. You might compare it to stepping on a stage and realizing the audience fell silent too quickly, or waking from a nap certain another presence hovers near the bed even if it makes no sound. My skin prickled. I turned, half expecting Dad to tease me for dawdling. Instead, I met the most horrifying vision my childhood could ever conjure. The house wall nearest the driver's side door stood fully illuminated by both headlights. Leaning against that siding, perpendicular to brick, clung a creature that merged nightmare with impossible anatomy. Imagine a human skeleton overlaid by parchment skin dried to the color of rotten, yellowed parchment. Imagine the joints swollen with knotting cartilage, yet the limbs stick, thin, sinews drawn taut, so every rib ridge protruded. It wore no clothing. Nothing hid the horrible angles of knees and elbows. The figure crouched on all fours, not standing, not lying, but braced horizontally upon the vertical wall, as if invisible magnets pinned its palms and feet to siding like grotesque claws. Its bald head looked too wide for the neck, skull surface shiny in the glare, blotched with patches darker than bruises. The most terrible features, though, were eyes and mouth. Eyes, two circular discs, glowed like furnace coals. Deep red centers simmering within black pits. No eyelids shuttered their light. Beneath them stretched a grin so enormous it divided the lower face nearly ear to ear, a gash packed with needle teeth, each point catching gleams from headlights. The entire tableau lasted no more than a few heartbeats, yet those heartbeats stretched to eternity. I did not scream, not immediately. I stared, transfixed, my foot still poised above a fragile ice sheet. Finally, shock broke, and I stumbled backward, sliding on crusted snow, rushing toward the porch while words poured out between sobs. Inside, warmth enveloped me, and bright kitchen lights felt jarringly ordinary. But terror clung. I clutched Mother's coat sleeve, babbling descriptions, skinny, yellow, sticking to the house, red eyes, giant teeth. She soothed in a voice parents reserve for nightmares after thunder. Told me I must have glimpsed shadowy branches, or maybe a cardboard box catching light. Still shaking, I begged her to keep Dad indoors. Part of me knew no creature could scale siding silently, yet deeper instinct insisted danger still lurked beyond the door. Mother tucked me into bed early, partly to calm me, partly so they could finish chores without jittery interruption. I lay beneath flannel sheets, listening to radiators hiss, eyes refusing to shut. Hours crawled until weariness blurred vision, and I surrendered to sleep. If the story ended there, child sees impossible monster, adults dismiss vision as overactive imagination, perhaps my adult self could file it under odd childhood memory. But the night held another chapter. Sometime after midnight, an odd compulsion yanked me awake. Not fear precisely, more like an invisible hand lifted my shoulders, turned my head toward frost-rimmed bedroom window panes. The moon had risen full and bright, laying silver across farm fields so clearly I could count fence posts. Fresh snow had fallen before dusk, an unbroken sheet covering yard and garden. Yet one detail shattered that quiet beauty. Alone in the middle of whiteness, a humped figure crept on hands and knees, bony limbs bent back arched, its skin that same dull brown yellow, face lifted just enough to reveal two eyes pulsing crimson. No headlights lit them now, yet they glowed as fiercely as before. I gasped. Whether the sound carried, I cannot know, but the creature halted. Slowly, deliberately, that bald head turned until eyes locked directly on mine. I felt those eyes as blades sliding under ribs, an awareness so total it swallowed the night. Fight or flee instinct screamed flee. I dove backward, clutched blanket edges, pulled covers over scalp, and crammed fists against ears as if cotton could muffle reality. My heartbeat thundered in the cotton cave. Outside, wind hooted around eaves, knocking sleet crystals against glass. I whispered prayers, begged morning to arrive, pictured Christmas lights, anything but that face. Eventually, exhaustion knocked me back to restless slumber. Dreams twisted between snowfields and calendars ripped apart by claws. When pale dawn finally seeped through curtains, I dragged legs from mattress, tiptoed to kitchen, where Mother flipped pancakes. She asked about my rest. I lied, answering fine, though dark circles under my eyes betrayed me. 10 minutes later, Dad clomped in from shoveling. He stamped boots on mat, brushed ice from beard, then asked a question that turned syrup in my stomach to ice. "Either of you kids crawl around the yard last night?" Mother frowned. "Of course not. They were both asleep." "Well," Dad said slowly, "there's tracks all over, small ones, like a youngster was crawling. Handprints and knees, straight across the snow from the drive to the garden." The spatula sagged in Mother's hand. She glanced at me and must have seen blood drain from my cheeks. I set my fork down, suddenly nauseated, yet words refused to form. Dad shrugged, chalking mystery to neighborhood prank even though we had no nearby neighbors with toddlers. He asked if pancakes tasted okay, poured more coffee, moved on, as adults often must, because day's chores demand attention. Life marched forward, the way rivers flow past stones lodged in their bed. December page turned, Advent candles lit, snowmen rose, toppled, melted. Yet every window after dark became potential doorway for glowing red eyes. I found myself skirting hall corners so moonlight wouldn't catch me, using a hand to block side vision whenever I crossed in front of glass. My brother teased gently, "You scared of Santa peeking?" but never mocked because even he sensed residue of something heavier than folklore. Then the accident came. Early spring, slick roads, a truck fishtailing on black ice. Metal screamed. The van spun. My brother and I, buckled in back, survived with bruises and shattered confidence. Mother, in the passenger seat, did not come home. People told us, "Count blessings, hold memories." They did not know a different memory played behind my eyelids every time comfort threatened to erase horror.
A leather-skinned thing crouched beneath moon, razor mouth grinning as if foreseeing tragedy. In years following, I consumed folklore, searching for demons matching my vision. Baktak of Persian myth crouching on sleepers' chests, wendigos of Algonquin winter woods, European strigoi, even medieval woodcuts of gargoyles clinging to cathedral walls. None fit exactly. Each held fragments, glowing eyes, skeletal form, hunger for souls, but no text said, "Yes, this is what crawls across snowfields toward little girls." Some nights I wonder whether it was omen, harbinger, embodiment of grief traveling ahead of catastrophe. Some psychologists would call the creature a projection of subconscious dread. Yet Dad saw those tracks. New snow recorded prints clearly, hand, knee, leading straight beneath my window. No barefoot child could crawl across sub-zero drifts without frostbite, or at least waking parents by cries. I have moved to cities since, living among neon lights and round-the-clock traffic hum, places where darkness rarely falls thick. Even so, curtains stay closed after sunset. If a winter wind taps branch against siding, heartbeats accelerate. When I must fetch water at 2 a.m., I lift a hand beside my face to shield peripheral view from back porch door glass. It looks silly, but it lets me sleep later. I married last year. My husband knows pieces of this story, the safe parts, trimmed of razor teeth. But I have not described the grin in full. I cannot bring that grin into rooms where we share coffee or laughter. Some memories are best left outside, like shoes caked with graveyard mud. And yet I write these words because part of me believes testimonies matter. Maybe someone else saw the same thing and hides behind blankets, thinking no one would believe. Maybe a parent hearing this will pause before dismissing a child's terror as tricks of moonlight. If what visited our siding that night was truly a demon, or spirit, or hungry wanderer between worlds,
it has likely crawled other walls, stared through other panes. I pray whoever meets its gaze next finds courage to break eye contact and run. For once those eyes anchor to yours, they do not wholly release. Not after years, not after seasons of love and healing, not after you tell yourself rational truths. They wait at the edge of memory, and sometimes, when December nights fall silent enough to hear snow crystals settling, the memory waits at your bedroom window too. So if you live where nights grow vast and silent, where porch lights throw long beams against siding, teach your children small rituals of caution. Let them know not every shadow owes them courtesy. And when you flip a calendar from November to December, thrill at anticipation. Yes, but learn to glance sideways as well. For the dark that cakes our world has corners deep enough to hide red-eyed things with mouths full of knives, things no wider than a child yet older than any nightmare we invent.